Okay, this is episode 24 of OverSight. Usual host and all that jazz. Up to number 24. So for this episode, we will be planting a bomb somewhere. And then through all of our relationships and clues given through the show, by the end of the show, Crumbz will attempt to defuse that bomb or have to kill his daughter. Those are the only two options that can be presented, and it's up to him as to which he does. I mean, it's actually news to him that he has a daughter, but that's a part of the surprise. Exactly. Towards the end of the episode, that was going to be one of the surprises. Now, here's the thing.
No. The thing is, I feel like in many ways, my relationship with you has been kind of an episode of 24 where you're trying to set up bombs and I'm trying to defuse them constantly.
Yeah. Plus, there was that scenario where I could have just stayed in safety and respectability and credibility in esports in a massive game like League of Legends that's got all this established success and still going somewhere, has like a big future. But instead, I risked my credibility, my esports life, as it were, to come in, try and help you steer this fucking train wreck of an Overwatch game. The whole time, people firing shots, killing memes that I dearly love and that mean a lot to me in my life. And I have to allow these casualties, this human collateral damage, to go by the wayside, all to try and save you, because I promised your mother that I'd get you out of this esports meme war alive. And God damn it, I intend to do that.
I thought we agreed not to talk about the Pepe genocide, Thorin. Exactly. I thought we agreed.
No, there never was a Pepe genocide. You have to understand, Monty. There never were Pepes. I don't know what you're referring to. You need some more time in the rehabilitation clinic or whatever they've set up over there now. So, okay. So our guests for this episode, Monty, got kind of a varied panel here. We've got Crumbz over here, who obviously was a long-time professional League of Legends player. Interesting detail not a lot of people know. At one point was a top laner. Actually even could have been in TSM. You know, the really good team that won all those titles. Instead, he took a different choice. He went to Dignitas and had a lot of good times. That's all that matters, Monty. He met some cool people, had some good times. You know what?
He memed out of control with Cutie Pie and Kiwi Kid.
Exactly. Winning's not for everyone. So anyway.
No one can ever say they A-ranked finals like we did.
Exactly. Yes. Literally A-rammed the finals and bragged before about throwing it and got caught. So just trifecta. You did all three. Well done. But still had a career afterwards, so fair play. You were actually one of the rare early instances of match fixing that didn't ruin someone's whole career.
Except there weren't any rules back then. We could do whatever we wanted.
Exactly. So anyway, after that, as a jungler, he had a lot of time in Dignitas. Later on, obviously, people will remember, he actually played in a team called Renegades. And this team called Renegades was owned by Monte Cristo. That's weird. What do you mean? It was a team and it was owned. Why is it not owned anymore? That's a story for another day. But what I will tell you is, interestingly enough, Renegades is actually most famous in the esports world for having an Australian Counter-Strike team. In fact, the brand still has an Australian Counter-Strike team now. And in Australian rhyming slang, they have a term that they call people a crumb. And it comes from the rhyming slang, which is breadcrumb, which is supposed to mean bum. It's kind of like a bit like Cockney rhyming slang. This is all true, by the way. In the end, though, Monty, the thing is, even though we've got Crumbz here and he was in Renegades, I think in the end you could say a lot of the people in Renegades were Crumbz.
Wow, that's deep. I don't even know.
It is. There's layers there. There's layers to this shit, mate. You got to understand. I know I'm doing it. So, see, this is more like a sort of meme quiche. You know, every time you think you've hit the new out, ooh, cheese, something hidden under there, isn't it? A little bit of Polish sausage. Right, so our other guest for this, also Crumbz actually obviously works on the Overwatch broadcast now, appears on panels, all sorts of stuff, even has credibility. Just saying that. Not everyone who appears on those panels does.
I even actually,
personal opinion.
You know, the Florida Mayhem, the Misfits team, I was the one that came up with that name. That was me. So I got some credibility there too.
I don't even know who's lying anymore.
No, is that true? Is it really?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. I'll tell you exactly how it happened. We were there thinking of a name, and I was like, all right, this team is a bunch of misfits. How should we name it? What can the gaming community relate to? And so that was the name. And then it became Renegades after, and it split up with Renegades and Misfits, and then they carried on the name into Overwatch, and now it's Mayhem.
Right. Okay. Not bad. To be fair, the original Renegades probably could have been called Misfits also, so it all ties back in. All comes back to the source at the beginning again. Okay, so our other guest for this episode is Beezy, who is the analyst for the Philadelphia Fusion. And if you know anything about the Philadelphia Fusion, this is like constant moving parts, pieces coming in, pieces leaving the equation, a lot of spinning plates going on here. So you must have your work cut out for you, Beezy, right?
Yeah, it's a very dynamic team, I think is the nice way to say it.
Okay. So what I thought we could, yeah.
I can't even when I'm listening to your comms and stuff. It's always confusing for me because you have so many different accents that I sometimes have trouble understanding what people are saying. Because you have players from 9 different nationalities, and I think they just get used to it. But it is wild the first time you listen to them to hear everybody's accent and like try and decode what everybody's saying so quickly.
I think the funniest part is like because not a lot of people know a lot of Finnish people, so they just assume the way Fraggy sounds the Finnish accent. It is not. Like, that is just a Fraggy accent. So it's really like it's 10 nationalities, one being the sovereign kingdom of Fraggy. You listen to any other Finnish person talk, they don't sound like that.
That's true. Is it like a local dialect or something? He does sound quite strange.
I don't think so. I think it's just who he is. And, we love it, but the comms are definitely interesting.
Okay. He's just the Finnish equivalent of that guy out of like the Police Academy movies who just had that, what was his name, Michael something or other. Remember the guy I'm talking about, Monty? The one who had like, hey guys, what are you doing? Like that one. It's not a bad impression actually, because I obviously don't have that material available in front of me right now. I haven't did it all from memory. So okay, before, what my concept for this episode, since we're between the stages and the next one hasn't begun, is first of all, there have been a bunch of roster moves, so we can definitely talk about those. Obviously, we can to some degree recap the last split. But what I thought we would do was, obviously, we'll talk to Beezy about Philadelphia Fusion. They're obviously a team on the rise. But then beyond that, let's do an episode that's kind of like state of the Overwatch League. Like, we'll just go down all the franchises, where they're at. We can actually take into account where they're at over the 2 stages, because obviously some of them are in a lot of trouble. Going to have to absolutely turn things around. So let's start out at the beginning then. Okay, Beezy, let's talk a bit about the Philadelphia Fusion. Because as I said in the intro there, it is a team that hasn't had its what would have been the starting lineup from day one, right? You've had to use pieces at some point in time and then not know for how long, and then bring people in and then work in different lineups. And is it still a work in progress? Is the final team kind of set in place now to some degree?
So it's still a work in progress. I think one thing that might give some good context is that, we were the last team to join the Overwatch League. And so our tryouts really like ran up until the last day. It was like October 30th, I think was the last day we had. And then, as everyone knows, we missed the preseason. So we had about 2 months of time where the 6 European guys were able to scrim and practice together. And they built up a lot of synergy.
In Europe.
In Europe, yeah, exactly. So, and again, it was versus the tier 2 European teams. Luckily, because everyone overlooked the European region, there was still enough talent there to get decent scrims. And so that included Snillo and EQO in that lineup. And then we get over here, and Josh, EQO was very late. Snillo is 17. And we have a team that has, we're 3 days before the start of the Overwatch League. We have a team that hasn't played together at all. And Shadowburn is a player who's like really, really, really specific. He has a very unique play style. And so, there's a moment where we're like, we've been running these comps with EQO, who's incredibly flexible and incredibly vocal. And now Shadowburn, just slot into that. And similarly for Carpe, who's obviously a god, and you could put Carpe in any lineup and it would be an upgrade, I think. Carpe, we've been doing this with Snillo. It's time for you to come in, and he also has a unique playstyle. So I would say that the stage 1 lineup was definitely a little all over the place, just because we had run a lot of practice time with just the European guys. And obviously, we have people like Hoppa on the bench, people like Dayfly on the bench who are very talented players, and we're still working on getting them in. I don't know if you guys, it was a few weeks ago that Numlocked on his stream made that statement about how he doesn't get to scrim and how he feels depressed because he doesn't have a chance to improve. That's not how we do things. We have 12 guys. We can in-house. We'll schedule double blocks with other teams. So everyone's always getting a chance to prove themselves. So the long answer to your question is it's still a work in progress. And, obviously Sato's, I don't know if a lot of people have gotten to see him play, but he's an incredible monkey. And we are looking forward to seeing how we can slot him in either 2 games before the end of stage 3 or stage 4.
Now that would be a straight fire name for a franchise. Incredible Monkeys.
Well,
don't attempt to guess where they'd be from, Monty. You can get in trouble with these things, mate.
No.
Leave them anywhere.
We learned a long time ago that monkey comparisons are
Could be from
not
anywhere in the world. Exactly.
Not welcome on this show. So to discuss this too, you guys. Now, when we came into Overwatch League, obviously you were late, so you didn't get there for the preseason because you couldn't get all the players over to LA in time. But given the depth of this roster and the sheer talent on it, it was most people's guess that you guys would be very good eventually. It was just a matter of how much time that was going to take. For me, you guys did much better in stage 1 than I would have expected. And then obviously things are really coming together for you towards the end of stage 2. And you don't even have access to your full roster yet because Sato is going to be suspended until the end of stage 3. So for you guys, it's also been interesting because, like you say, Shadowburn is a player who's very all or nothing in his play style. And you also had to bend around Fraggy, who is also one of the weirder tanks. Like, so for you, what were the struggles like? Because you have so many players that sort of have been used to teams playing around them, whether it was Fraggy with Giganti or it was Shadowburn with FaZe. So how have you adapted with these players? Like, what have you been focusing on in terms of coaching?
There's been a lot of focused work on Fraggy. I think he's a really smart player. I think, if he has a problem, it's that when the team loses direction, he will. That's when he starts to make the Fraggy jumps, that we've seen become famous now. So I think the biggest thing at the start was trying to get Shadowburn to kind of play, to understand how the team plays. Again, we had been running those scrims. He was in Russia and would kind of observed a lot of them, but he didn't play in that team. So I mean, you say that, by the way, when you said before, he's very particular, and then you were talking about all these aspects, it sounds like he's a bit of a stubborn player, right? No. So Shadow is when I first met him, I assumed he'd have an ego. He's a really shy, really humble, really sweet person. It's just he's from TF2, right? That's why he's one of the reasons he's so good at Pharah is he's played these games for so long, and it's not. I mean, if you remember back, we had. For our match versus Houston and then London that week, this stage, we were actually planning to play EQO, but he got sick, and I'm sure you guys know about the flu that's been going around. And so Shadow at the last minute stepped in. Sombra's not a hero he's particularly comfortable on. We said, we need you to do this. Route 66, he had, I think, 2 huge EMPs, killed Raucus pretty much outright with it. And so when needed, he definitely is flexible. It's just if you watch him play Genji, he just spends a lot of time hiding, which will oftentimes result in him getting huge picks and him being in the right place at the right time. But it also means that if you're a team and one of your DPS is not kind of putting pressure out there, and is not sieging, and is not in your face being a constant threat, it changes the way you have to play. You have to play a little more far back. You have to be a little more cautious. So not a stubborn player at all, but definitely a unique play style.
So one of the criticisms of Shadowburn is that basically he will hold his blade effectively forever. So he will always hold his blade. So if he knows that the enemy, say, has Transcendence, he will always wait until the Transcendence is used before pulling blade, as opposed to pulling blade to force the Transcendence. And we know he does this because there's sometimes 4 or 5 minute periods where it will just be a mind game between him and a Zenyatta, where it's the Zenyatta's holding trans. Is this something you've been trying to work on, or is this something that you think is effective for your team? Because he holds his blade ridiculously long at times.
He does. I think so part of it is proper ult, right? I mean, you guys, I think, have access to the comms as well. It's not all. You don't?
Nope.
Oh, interesting. Well, you can, when we're watching the game, we have all those views and we can hear what our guys are saying. And they'll oftentimes, they're really good at all tracking, but sometimes they'll get it a little bit wrong. They'll, depending on when the Zen died in a fight, they might have not incorporated that. So I don't think it's something we're necessarily working on. I think, again, he's a very particular player, and the kind of, how do I put you can't I don't think you can normalize Shadowburn, right? I think part of what makes him so good and such an impressive Genji is that he plays so uniquely. And I think there's some players like there's mistakes that you can coach, with Fraggy kind of helping him understand proper bubble management, help him understand how to play around with the diva like better. Those are things that are just kind of linear coaching things. And then there's things like Shadowburn, where again it's just an idiosyncrasy that I think is part of who he is. So
when do you see that style fruition against an opposing team? Like when is that specific Shadowburn style more effective than the EQO? Because from what I've been seeing, EQO and Carpet seem to have better synergy because they're obviously harassing together, whereas Shadowburn is more the individual. Is there a specific team or approach where that is the way to go?
Yeah, we like playing Shadow versus Houston. I don't know if you remember stage 1, the first, we were going up against them on Anubis. It was like a must-win map, I think. And he had been holding his blade for, I think it was 2 pushes. Finally goes in, uses it into the trance, like I think Raucous pop trance, Shadowburn pops his blade, and then because he was hiding for so long, he didn't need to do his signature dash into the air. He was like already behind the enemy team. Goes in, forces the trance out, ends up being on the point by himself for I think 20 seconds, gets his blade back immediately, uses it and kills him. And I think Shadow's he's a very clutch player. So I think on those Anubis maps, and I think he did the same thing later on in the stage too. I think like on second point of Assault, I think Shadow's a really good player to have because those are situations where it's really all or nothing, right? Like the close spawn for the enemy, long spawn for you. You need someone who can go in and just wipe, and I think that's where he really shines. Obviously, his Pharah play is also. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say he's the best Pharah in the league.
He's certainly top tier.
Who else would be in the conversation?
Yeah, Monte, who'd you put up there?
Yeah, let's see. I'd probably put Libero up there. Yeah. Fleta, obviously. Those would probably be the top 2, I think, that I would put up there. Maybe Dreamcasper. But those guys would be top for me.
Nobody from Spitfire?
No. They actually they don't really play Pharah all that much. I don't think they're a very strong Pharah team. Yeah, those would probably be. I mean, AKM maybe as well, but we haven't seen him do that in a little bit. But yeah, I think Dreamcasper, Fleta, and Libera would be tops alongside Shadowburn.
Okay, because obviously that's one of the concerns, Beezy, is that since Shadowburn didn't appear towards the end of the stage, and then obviously not in the playoffs at all, people are going to be wondering, does this mean he's kind of like a bench player now and he'll only be used in specific settings, basically?
I think we are, again, we're not a team like the Valiant who's going to leave someone on the bench or take them to in and out and have an awkward conversation. We're a team
Except you did do that, actually.
Yeah, exactly. We're better, by the way.
What the fuck are you talking about? You actually literally did that.
Yeah, but here's the difference, Monty. He did it actually as a joke with self-awareness, whereas they did it for real, thinking that was cool. So
I gotta wonder,
there's a difference.
If you're the guy cutting that video together, like at any point do you stop and think, was this a good idea? Like, is this gonna play well?
That does make you wonder if the LA Valiant is some sort of like Soviet Empire scenario where everyone's just really afraid to ever tell their superior, like, I don't think this is a good idea. This isn't coming up. What are you talking about? Were you saying I wasn't good in this video? No, you were great. Noah, you were fucking. It's really the player, if anything. Yeah, I think we should leave this. No, I like actually some of his answers. Yep.
No, right. Not only should you have had this conversation, but also filming it was just the best idea. Great conversation. Exactly how you should manage your players. Like, definitely that's is the way to go. Catch them by surprise too. Make sure they're young. Make sure they're young guys.
Again, we don't know. This is one of those things, which is why I was railing against their idea of radical transparency, because we take this as how they treat agilities, but for all we know, there have been half a dozen other conversations that were more reasonable, right?
Yeah.
But because they portray themselves this way, it makes it seem like it's really extreme.
Monty, here's the sad thing. This is my conspiracy theory. Let's go a level deeper. Like, actually, the real way that Noah Winston runs things is he has like a think tank and he has like analytics data, and he just cares about the numbers and the bottom line. So he just runs the numbers and it says he has to cut someone. But he heard this, all the young people online on this social media are saying that they want transparency. So this is his Mark Zuckerberg attempt to actually seem like a human. He was like, right, we'll film a whole thing where I'm like interacting with one of the players and I'll pretend to have a relationship relationship with him and be like, I'll do a lot of like Steve Jobs power hand moves, like this is your shot, like, you know, like it seemed so awkward. It's like Noah was the one I was like, have you ever actually had a conversation with anyone?
The key to all this is that they never look at the camera directly. They never acknowledge it. That's the impressive part.
Yeah, it is like it's filmed like a reality TV show. So Beezy, I have to ask you. So were you a part of this like process at all where you got Snillo in the car to recreate this scene?
A little bit, yeah. I think we were, so when we were all in the dugout, you know, when the Valiant thing came on, we hadn't seen it online. We were sitting there like, this is incredible. And we started memeing, I think Snillo was in there at the time. We started memeing around with him like Snillo, watch out, buddy, you're next, you're going to In-N-Out. And then it was actually our marketing team that was like, no, we can make a legit video. I mean, I'm trying to imagine, because I've had jobs before where the CEO is this figure who's kind of a scary guy because he wields so much power. And imagining the CEO of my old company coming to my office and telling me that like I've been fucking up and I have one chance left, like that is beyond terrifying to imagine. And then to know that it's gonna play and my parents are gonna be able to watch that conversation, like it's just, you know, it's, I don't know, the whole thing is insane. But the original question was what's going on with Shadowburn, and you know, no, we have guys playing. We have guys playing every week. We're running in-houses. We're running blocks. We are, you know, for example, Blizzard World's coming up, right? So we're involving all of our guys in kind of team talks about what we want to play. I think right now, generally in sports, you don't tinker with the lineup that's winning. And so unless we are going to like, I would say that while things are going well, we're probably not going to be looking to make many changes, but you know, it's a new meta, it's a new stage, and we're still experimenting with different things. So,
well, the thing about sports though is that in sports you don't have patches that might change the lineup that is optimal. So,
I mean, you know, there's metas in football, right? Like you'll have a passing meta, and then you'll have
yes, but those are much slower to change because you're not literally changing the rules of the game.
Yeah, we are definitely, you know, we are looking into experimenting with a lot of stuff. That we're lucky to have. Like Shadowburn is a player that should be starting the Overwatch League. You know, we have a lot of talent. I think Hoppa is probably one of the better off tanks actually. Like our second squad, you know, and I know people hate when people talk about scrim results because it's, you know, doesn't really mean much. But our second squad, you know, they would be a contender in the Overwatch League. But no, he's not a bench player. We don't have bench players. We have 12 talented players, and you know, we're going to look for opportunities to get everyone in. I think right now with stage 3, the fact that it's a map that hasn't been played competitively, and also a meta that I think, you know, it's not the meta that contenders are being played on, so we can't really source from our contenders guys who are really smart and thoughtful at the game. So there's a lot of kind of planning and thinking going on right now.
Okay, so I want to talk about your meme game again. So why I want to talk about this is that Fusion has been a very interesting team to watch from the outside. I think
started from the bottom. Yeah,
you start from the like actual dumpster. So you started with like, this is how we do it in Philly, and just some spectacular, like honestly, like spectacular.
Did you enjoy the video, Monte?
If it was a parody, it'd be one of the funniest videos ever made. But again, much like with the Valiant example. You know.
Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy it as content, Thorin? Did you enjoy it as content?
Yes. Yes.
Then you're welcome. Okay. That's all.
Okay. Let's just go. Okay. It was not made as a joke. You don't announce your team as a fucking like piece of satire. All right. I mean, if you did, I think that was a mistake in and of itself, but we know it wasn't satire anyway.
It was a real attempt to.
Yes, it was. So watching like the horrific announcement of this team.
It was the esports equivalent, by the way, of like, hello, fellow esports kids.
Siren.
We are also in esports, you know. Yeah, it was that kind of level, you know.
So the team comes in, and this you know, everybody's like, what the actual fuck is going on with these guys? Like, oh good God, do they know what they've gotten themselves into? And then for now, we're here with this honestly like spectacularly well-made parody of the Valiant. And so you've gone from like bottom tier memeing to probably the best, like most hilarious team in the actual league. All the stuff you did with the Treehouse, with Sideshow, all the content has been honestly awesome. And like I was so impressed. I was reading the Reddit thread about the video with Snillo, and people pointed out that you literally had to wait for another rainy day to sit in that same parking lot.
Fake news.
What do you mean?
There's a very talented videographer who spent several takes worth of time pouring water bottles on the car.
See, that's even fucking better, right?
Yeah. It's funny too, because like you have this really we have these really qualified people in the marketing department, and honestly, like that's the answer. You just have talent there. And then Zach's just on the roof of the car, fucking pouring water on it, and it's like this.
So that's even better. But I appreciate the attention to detail, is what I'm saying. Like it was honestly just like so fucking funny, because even like shot by shot, Tucker, who is your GM, was like making similar hand movements and had the script like down. So I was really impressed with the effort that went into it, and obviously it was hugely successful. So it's been. What were the factors that like you guys were searching for like a meme specialist, which became a joke in and of itself, but then actually seemed to work? So do you contribute? Obviously you contributed to the fantastic diva cosplay that you did after you beat New York, but has this been a group effort among the players and the coaching staff to sort of turn the social media around? Has it been people you hired, a combination thereof?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is how we do it in Philly. Like there was no one here. All right, I got to California November 1st as planned. It was me, Roston.
I remember you were the only one who was here.
Yeah, I had like a lonely conversation with you and the other casters. Like it's just me. It was me, Roston, and Hung, and so we had no players. We had literally nothing to make content with. So how we do it in Philly obviously was not the best thing that could have been made, but
in fact, it was one of the worst things that has ever been made.
Okay, but here's what I would say: Valiant had all their players, and they did that fucking god awful thing at the library, right? Where they had their announcement. It was just like word art, kind of like player names, and so they had their full.
I mean, the Boston one was pretty bad too, but this was like next level bad.
Yes, we were the worst. I'm not here. No, I think we have like a really talented marketer. Hung Tran is our director of marketing. He had 8 years at the Flyers. I think I don't know how other teams do it, but I have to imagine he's like probably the most qualified person in that role. We have a meme specialist who we actually hired, who does our social media, does great. We have several like videographers, several people who it's their full-time job to kind of come up with this stuff. So I think there is some credit to the players. We have meme guys. Like if you ever spend any time with Boombox, you know that she's just like incapable of being serious. But a lot of it is just that there's smart people working on these things full time.
Yeah, her title is really meme specialist.
It is and she would want me to get this right. It is social media coordinator. It's like a real job,
No, meme specialist is a real job these days.
I don't know.
But in any case, it's been really fun to see you guys turn it around. And honestly, like Fusion's content, I think is one of my favorite like team branded content in esports now, which I would have not thought possible given how things started. So it's been cool to see the turnaround.
Yeah, to be fair, like you can't make how we do it in Philly with potential, right? Because like, it was bad. And that's just on the table. But like it was well produced, I think.
It was fucking terrible.
No, he means as in like it was shot really well. And
no, it wasn't.
It did. It was like a real commercial on television.
It was not.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't.
There's literally there's Adult Swim commercial.
Yeah.
No, it looked like a fucking Dell commercial. Like, hey, your kids have got a PC. Look, they're doing the schoolwork.
You took it down, but there's tons of other. No, but my favorite thing is there's like this jump cut in the middle of Carpe where it's just like he's like this, and then it just like jump cuts to another shot of him. No, it is not. Come on, dude, it is not like a real commercial. It's like poorly made.
Do you want some? That was not the first draft. Okay, so when we got the first draft of the video,
good God,
it featured like jump cuts where the maps would change like mid-team fight. It featured Lucio going from dancing on the payload to opening a loot box during the game.
Holy shit!
That's also how they do it. They open loot boxes.
By the way, okay. So here's what we need now. So you guys deleted it off your YouTube, which like honestly makes me super sad. So here's a fucking
bullshit in that.
Yeah, it's bullshit. Like you got to own that. But here's a fire piece of content for you, okay? Upload that video as the fucking "This is how we do it in Philly" director's cut, and it will be absolutely fucking. I need to see this now. I know you have it.
Yeah, we do.
You also should. Here's the thing you should have done. You should have just released it today on April Fool's Day. Like we're still doing it in Philly, and it was like the same shit again, but the worst version. That would be because then you would be owning it. Yeah. Then people will think, they understand that this is terrible now, you know. Like, for example, or the obvious move that they should do in the Valiant is do the same thing, but then have Noah Winston with someone else. Like, we're going to give you another chance at making videos, Noah, but it can't be like this, okay? We're going to give you one more shot, but I need to know that you're on the same page with us because your performance thus far hasn't been quite, you know, like they should do the meme themselves. You have to own the meme.
Embrace the meme. Tells him that's what he's maybe.
Yes, exactly. That could be right.
So what you do is you have one of the players saying the same shit to Noah. That's what you should do. Yeah, you reverse it. And have Noah's performance be evaluated. That would be funny. But there you go. There's your April Fool's Day idea. Cancel whatever other Philly plans because people won't even unless they watch this show. People aren't even going to know that it was actually a for real serious cut. That's even worse. And you can redeem yourselves in some ways, right? While simultaneously providing something absolutely hilarious to the community.
I'll tell you what, Monty, I'll make you a guarantee. If it exists, you will at least see it.
Yes. All right. I think everybody should see it. Come on, you guys have turned it around. You have a sense. You guys have made fun of yourselves for doing that, which is also fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
You got to keep it rolling.
It was weirdly bad. The first. Also, you can play on a Mac. And the girl in that shot does play Overwatch. She's just a console gamer.
Okay. You should have had the console.
I mean, maybe. You know, again, like it was like a 3-man operation. We had no players. You know, Carpe was in Korea, and his English has actually gotten a lot better. But you know,
it's true.
He was a little rusty too. So you know, how we do it in Philly the director's cut will resurface at some point. I don't think it'll be. I think. You know, everyone else started doing a great job with April. We need to necessarily add our voices there.
Okay, well, everybody needs to tweet at the Philadelphia Fusion that get them to this is how we do it in Philly director's cut. That's what I want to see now.
Right, let's talk about some of the other teams then. So we'll do it by going down some of the teams that have done roster moves recently. It'll be a good in. So LA Valiant is a team that obviously has been having issues in the DPS department, and it was announced that they have signed Bunny from the Soul Dynasty. So what do you make of this, Crumbz? What do you think of where Valiant was at and what Bunny joining this team? Is this the right move?
Well, let me just offer the first caveat that I've been away for a week and I've been just getting hit with the news of all the roster changes today and in between last night.
Right, we're getting a fresh take. Good.
Yeah, got a fresh tank.
No time for you to write that script that you normally do.
No, not at all. Well, Bunny coming into it obviously is Soon. Soon is the guy that is playing the Tracer role before, so it's either Soon's getting booted or they're just dividing the team into 2 squads as they've been trying to do.
Okay, and did they need another Tracer?
Man, I don't know what the hell is going on with that. It seems like it's the only team that is seriously not having fun. Like every other team seems like they're enjoying their time there, where this one just seems like just drama.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that Regal Shields have a lot of fun.
One of the teams. They look like one of the teams that's
sorry,
not
wait a minute.
Fun.
He meant one of the real teams, right? Okay, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like it's really a really stressful environment there, and I'm not.
Yes,
I imagine this has to do with pleasing. But
no, Valiant is a team that has a winning record, right?
Yeah,
so
like they're a good team. They're a good team. They have good players, but this probably just means more synergy with the Koreans. Like Korean players tend to want more Korean players around them, so that's probably it. You have Fate and Envy, tank duos. In how many other sports was the idea of, or esports rather, where you bring in one Korean and instead you say, how about we do 2 so they get along better? How about now we bring in a DPS, like we work with the tanks a little better? So it might just be separating them into 2 language barrier rosters as opposed to one amalgamation of 3. But it seems like it's more than just gameplay for this trade.
I definitely agree. I even said the same thing, Crumbz, that what people didn't understand about what I call like the Korean creep, like the fact that gradually more and more Koreans will come in the Overwatch League, is exactly what you've said. Is that even if you're a team that only has the one, and you only have one at the time because you think, well, I've got this guy who's like a specialist, at this one role, and he's so good, he can play with people from any country. Well, odds are that guy is going to be like, we kind of need another role. I kind of know someone back in Korea. So you end up with him, right? And eventually, the joke obviously is eventually you're going to be like, why do we still need this last guy that's from the US? Why don't we just get another Korean? So it's kind of like the reverse of this old, I think it was an old Christopher Hitchens joke or something where he said that, in history, people began polytheistic, right? They believed in like a whole pantheon of many different gods. And then eventually, they became monotheistic. And he said, and they've only got one more god to go. So it's kind of the reverse of that. You start out with one Korean and eventually just get them all. I would have told you just start out with all Koreans, but you can work your way there, if you need sort of an adjustment period, exposure therapy, dip your feet in the water. But eventually you're going to have to jump in if you want to win and get that championship.
We'll see if Beezy agrees with that, considering he just took second place with you guys only played one the stage playoffs. So
yeah. I just like about that point though. It's a thing in conventional sports too. Like the Red Sox signed this guy Daisuke, I think back in like 2005, 2006, Japanese pitcher, and like they literally got another Japanese relief pitcher to be his friend.
Okay.
So it's like it's not just esports where this happens. I think there's
sure
you don't want people to feel isolated, and I think it's when we're in LA, I'm not as worried. There's K-Town there. It's a very international city, but you think about what it would be like to be the one Korean on a team that's going back to Houston, or the one Korean, and even to be honest, Philly. Like it's a pretty. You don't
look like you're from around here, boy.
That's not.
What are you, some kind of Korean DPS player?
I think they're probably.
You can imagine how lonely that would be, right? Like
yes.
To be fair, this city has a way more amenities for catering to Koreans that I think the teams have really figured out. Like you can basically make your life be Korea here by yourself. Yes. So even having another teammate is not necessary.
You can do it in New York too. So those are, and because there's like extensive, there's a Koreatown in Manhattan, in Queens, there's like in Flushing, there's an extensive Korean town as well. So there are options. I think Houston, just because it's like the fourth largest city in America, third or fourth largest behind LA, New York, and Chicago. Houston is enormous. So I think Houston probably does. Yeah.
Bigger than Atlanta?
Yes. Yeah. It's like the third or fourth largest city in America. So I think probably that won't be an issue so much in Houston. But yes, in principle, I definitely agree that it will be less comfortable for many of the Korean players once they start going to, once they start localizing or regionalizing.
Even just with diet, like our guys, they don't necessarily like American food, and you just wonder, unless you're gonna have a chef whose job is to feed them, like.
You got to expand their diet though, because I've been around many that are just so picky and not just Koreans, it's from other places. They're just outrageously picky. You got to broaden your horizons at some point.
Yes, but the thing about Korean food that you realize, first off, it's fantastic, but you realize from spending time around Koreans is that like Korean food is the equivalent to like Korean pro gamers as like yellow sunlight is to Superman's powers, and they actually will just wither away and not play well if they don't have access to it.
I think the other element. What?
I was gonna say, to your point, like I don't know if you guys follow. We have like a professional chef now who's fucking amazing. Like the best food ever, and she'll like make this elaborate like couscous risotto, like amazing dish, put it down. The Koreans will look at it for a second and then go grab a rice bowl or a ramen from the closet, and like, come on, it's so good, it's so good. So we're working on that. We're trying to do like crowdsource dinner ideas so they can actually eat the food. But
I know the Seoul Dynasty as well has all their meals catered by Korean, like a Korean catering company. So a lot of the teams are moving more towards that vein. Yeah, I am jealous that you get to eat all that food all the time.
I do think that an element about it actually that is missing between that Koreans don't like about Western food is that it's a very different activity. Eating in the States is really just like plowing down food for your sustenance, whereas Korean dining, it's like a social activity. You're eating with other people, you're sharing dishes all the time, whereas this is just like, here's food, it's gonna give me energy, put it in my body.
That might be how you eat.
Yeah,
That also just shows.
shows.
You have to understand, Crumbz right now is wearing a tank top. He's in reasonably good shape. He's sort of in the prime of his life, you know. He's still out there. I don't think Americans think that. I think they go, chocolate. Oh, this is delicious. Oh, and then their brain goes, more chocolate, sir. And they go, yeah, oh, more sugar. And then I'll wash this down with some nice orange soda. Delicious. Like, I don't think any of them are like, let me get some energy and sustenance into this body. Like, what sort of utilitarian nightmare is that, Crumbz? Like, that's not America.
I mean, that's definitely how I eat. If I had
People in America eat ding dongs. What fucking energy you get from that?
We can't all survive off meat and potatoes, Thorin. All right, it's
Exactly.
for more variety.
I think, well, Thorin in particular survives on a diet of pure sugar, so that's
I'm alive.
Permanently high on sugar.
Made it this far.
But yes, I do think it'll be interesting to see how the Korean players do adapt to any kind of regionalization. And yes, I think it has been an issue. But going back to the idea, let's bring it back to the Valiant here. So I agree with Crumbz that Bunny, I think that, okay, we're going to tie it all together now. So I agree with Crumbz that bringing Bunny on may be a way to either, because we've heard a lot of trade rumors about trade soon, or on the alternative, move them up to a 12-man roster. Now, to go back to what Beezy was saying earlier, that Numlocked was a player who is complaining about practice time. We did touch on this in the last episode, saying that it honestly sucks to be on a roster where you're a bench player and there aren't 12 players, because there's no two-way contracts. They can't go down and play in these contenders teams, which means that they can't practice as a team at all. So you're basically just stuck there playing solo queue on the bench and not improving. So you get caught in this vicious cycle where there's no way to get yourself back into a starting roster because you don't have play time. So I think this could also be a reaction to, say, Numlock's complaints or other players on the team that are complaining about how they are supposed to improve or challenge for a starting roster slot if they can't scrim as a unit. And honestly, it'll be great for the scene overall. I keep hammering this point, but I think every Overwatch League team should have 12 players so that you have two teams you can internally scrim. It will create better players when the teams expand, like when the league expands, because there'll be a deeper pool of players who have been actively scrimming for the last year to draw from. So I think it's incredibly important for the health of the league, and I hope that that's what Valiant is doing. For me,
at the very least, they also, remember, Monte, they don't have a contenders team. They're like one of the only teams who didn't do that. So we have a contenders team. It's really
them in Dallas, hilariously. Yeah. The teams with so many internal problems. Interesting. Anyway.
So it's just those guys, right?
So, yes, I do think that it's even more important for them as a result. Now, my question is, what do we think is going to happen to a player called Grim Reality and a player called Silk Thread? Because now the Valiant has 12 players on this roster, but they have 5 DPS players and only 3 support players. So it will be difficult for them at the current time to internally scrim.
There was something, I believe it might have been from his stream last week, where Silk Thread implied that he was just done with Overwatch League. Something like that. I don't have it on hand right now, so I can't say the specifics, but I believe it was implied he's just done entirely, not even just with his team. And so I think that was the notable aspect, was that he wasn't saying, like, I want to join another team or something.
So if that's the case, like, the question is, are they going to cut Silk Thread and Grim Reality? Because you sure as hell don't need 3 Tracer players on this roster with Grim. Are they going to cut Grim Reality and Silk Thread and then get another, we assume, projectile DPS to match with Agilities, because they already have the 2 Tracers, and then attempt to get another support player so they can have 2 separate rosters? I guess that's what they're going to do, but again, it's unclear. And we're filming this right now on April 1st, and the deadline for roster changes is Tuesday, April 3rd. So the teams have a couple days left to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Valiant were trialing supporters pretty recently. The only other piece of information I know is it's back when we were forming our team. There was some interest in the Rogue guys because they had proven themselves as talented players, and Unko and Soon it was made very clear that was a package deal. There was no way to pick up one of them without picking up the other. So, I mean, I also wonder if Soon goes, like, what happens with Unko, right? Because he's one of those support players that is now on a team, and his old teammates gone, and he still has Damon, who's drenched there. I would be very surprised if they don't end up. At which point they'd need another support.
Get a Korean support, and then now you have Kareem, so Korean support with another Korean support, and Korean DPS.
And by the way, my assumption was that Kareem was going back to support, which I guess is unfounded,
No,
right? So when I say
playing DPS,
yeah, I think he should. I think that's the smart way to move him around, right? He did say he didn't like playing DPS, so I'm assuming but that's an assumption I'm making. I'm just saying right now, technically, they only have 2 supports or 2.5 if we count Kareem as half a DPS and half a support. So their roster, if they are going to move into a 12-player roster and internally scrim, they cannot have this group of players, would be my take on it. So perhaps we will see some player movement in the next couple of days.
Beezy, if you were the GM of Valiant, how many pieces do you think they are away from actually being like best Western team, contender for the playoffs? So are they like one piece? Do they need to rehaul the squad? What's your take on it?
If I were the GM for the Valiant, I think I'd just walk in the pool and not come there.
Whoa!
I don't even know what's happening.
Wow, that's really damning for a team they're a winning team. They're like they're contending for a playoff right now. Come on.
That was for the first stage, the money. They actually had a losing record in stage 2.
Come on. It's not that bad. Holy shit.
I mean, look, here's the thing, right? Like when you're a team like Shanghai and you're constantly losing, and from all everything I've seen, like Shanghai's doing pretty well morale-wise. They've made some moves that I think it's clear they're going to be on an upward trajectory. Valiant, they were the best in the West for what, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then things started falling apart. I think from everything I know about what's going on in that team, I think it's just a toxic environment right now. And I don't think you can unless you bring in the world's most PMA person, or you just literally change the entire roster, I think you're going to have that problem persisting. And I'm not sure how much of it is coming from the top. I mean, we joked about the In-N-Out video, but like if that's a management style, then it's possible that it's not even a player issue, right? It's possible that it's just the team environment. They have talented pieces. I mean, Unko and Soon are really, really talented players. Kareem is good. I think Verbo
Fate and Envy have been playing well.
Fate and Envy are fantastic. I mean, it's unclear how well they would do individually with each other, but they're a great tank duo. Like if you look at Muma and Cool Matt, like they're a great tank duo, and I think they're a big reasons why Houston is a team. So they have like talented pieces there. My guess is that it's just a team environment thing, and also the fact that they can't run in-house, can't have all their guys scrimming means you're leaving pieces on the table. So I think it's more than just a move. I think you got to fundamentally change the way you run the team.
Exactly right. They're catering to the Korean element. That's like, all right, well, these guys are pretty good. Might as well go all in here instead of dealing with any other potential drama. Coach Moon coming in as well, right? So exactly. It makes even more sense to just go full steam ahead with Koreans.
Exactly. I mean, but that's not been Noah's.
I know, right? It does. Well, but
Noah has said specifically he doesn't want to do that.
But it has.
He's a hypocrite. Yeah, don't worry about that.
It totally has. Remember Immortals in League when it first came out. Huni and Rainover, the entire team was ran exclusively by Huni and Rainover. They did picks and bans. They did whatever they wanted. Coach could not handle their shit, and so everybody had to cater to them. When it turns out that they had championship-winning players in that same lineup, so he was catering to Koreans even on those days when it was only 2 out of the 5 players.
I'm just saying that he has said many times that he doesn't want to have an all-Korean roster, and as opposed to being a hypocrite, Thorin, I would like to believe, in my optimism, that it's really just learning about what the most effective way to run a team is, right? Which we had a debate with you, me, him, and Jack from Cloud9 on your esports salon on your channel where we discussed all of these issues. I think that it will change the way the team is run if they do move up to 12 players, and hopefully it can stabilize that environment, because it did seem, Numlocked has been pretty vocal, and I think understandably, about his inability to play the game right now, which I think fucking sucks. So I hope that will be a move that they will be making to stabilize the roster, and whether they get more Korean players or not, I don't know.
I think more Koreans doesn't necessarily mean going full Korean. Right? Like
Of
there
course.
are players like Gamsu who are, and players like Carpe even now is like, westernized is not the proper word, but like there are guys who play on teams with a lot of
integrated.
Crumbz literally played on a team in League of Legends with Gamsu.
Fucking hell, I thought you were going to say because Crumbz is from like...
No.
Are you from like Peru or something?
for it.
Or Chile? I thought he was going with that. Fucking hell.
No.
That's outrageous, Monty. What are you talking about?
He's Venezuelan, but no, I was just saying, like, to your point about Gamsu being more acclimated to playing with Western players, Gamsu has specifically been acclimated because he's played in both North America and Europe in a different game. Yes. So.
But I think honestly the solution is if they had a contenders team, like if your current team environment is toxic, and so bringing players into it is not an ideal thing. Like if you had a contenders team where you could get young talent and then kind of like say, this is, a building year. I know, which is a meme in esports because, there hasn't been franchise before now. So like a building year means we're going to get relegated. You can have
in fact, that is what it meant. And it was terrifying.
Yeah. But you can have a building year now. And so if they had a contender squad, like I would say, just put time and effort into that, but they don't have that. There's nowhere for them to bring up talent on their own. That's not their current shit show team environment. So I don't know. It's a tough problem.
Right, elsewhere, this just shows how next level Koreans are. So if I look at the New York Excelsior, I'd go, fucking hell, what a good team this is. They've got players top to bottom who are good. Seems like coaching staff's good. They're doing well in all the stages. Pretty much no problems. They've just added another player again. So they've added a player called Anamo, who comes from Mighty AOD back in the day, you may remember, from the Apex. But this player, support player, and they've also added another coach, right? New York Excelsior didn't need any extra players, surely.
Maybe they want to move into an internal scrim environment too. Can't be bad for them, right? I would think that would be something that would be desirable in the long run. Interesting because, like, obviously with Mighty AOD, like Moon comes in from the Mighty AOD club as well, right? On the Valiant to sort of bring it back over there because that's where Fate was playing, and Envy was playing. No, Karif was playing. Excuse me, beforehand. So this guy was on Ardiant though, which is I didn't see a ton of Ardiant because they were participating in the Overwatch Pacific Championship last year. So what that means is that they were a Korean team that was participating in Taiwan against like the Taiwanese teams like Flash Wolves. Against the Australian teams like Blank, against the Thai teams like Fireball. So they actually just ridiculously dominated season 2 of this league. Just to look at their stats and to give you an idea of how dominant they were 14-0 in their matches. They were 42-2 when it came to map score, and they 4-0'd the semifinals and 4-0'd the finals. So they lost a grand total of 2 maps and 0 matches for an entire season. So to say this was a dominant performance is somewhat of an understatement. So I am interested to see how Anamo is going to affect this roster. I think it's probably just one of those things where for the moment, they will. He's a Lucio player primarily. So remember, Arc actually did get sick earlier this stage, and Mono had to come in. He had like a wrist problem, I think, and Mono had to come in at the early stages of stage 2. So maybe they just want a backup player in case that happens again. I'll be interested to see how they use him.
More generally, though, what are your thoughts, Crumbz, on the New York Excelsior?
They've actually, I think that as a team, they've played very few, like, I wanted to get this stat, but it seems really difficult to find, but they're one of the teams that has done, from what I can tell, as little role swaps as possible, rather substitutions in game as possible. And I actually think that's been helping them out a lot. They keep the same lineup, work on the same strategy over and over and over, and simply have managed to perfect it. And I think that's given them more time to expand now their hero pool, and that's just been helping them even further. So they're, I think, on a trajectory to just get even better and refine out the remaining players to reach new heights.
Good news for everyone else in the league then.
Yeah, I mean, well, they have the best Zenyatta. They play around the Zenyatta the entire time, and they're able to literally get carried by individual skill that is combined with teamwork. Like, you don't have anybody that plays these heroes at a higher level. If you watch how they peel for Jonek, it's insane. Like, Mako spends most of his time just running back to try to save Jonek 24/7, and they create great windows of opportunity for him to hit the right clicks. Like, he has line of sight on right clicks more often than any other Zenyatta, gets damage boosted more often than any other Zenyatta, and he can actually hit the shots. And nobody can even come close to it because it's a strategy that needs individual skill as the main core.
It's also hard to practice against because you can't really find a team that's going to be doing that as effectively. So, Beezy, you were...
I'm getting the stat.
Oh, he has the stat.
I can answer this for you, Crumbz.
About the subs? 'Cause, yeah, that'd be sick.
Yeah.
Well, they played Jonas primarily on hybrid maps only in stage 2. So Mono was playing 3 out of the 4 maps, and Jonas was playing Kings Row and Hollywood. And then, that's basically what they were doing. And then we hardly saw Pine at all. So
barely any Pine. Supports stay the same. And Pine would just come in every once in a while. Like, I don't think at any point Pine felt like he was realistically going to be a starter on the team in any of the upcoming games.
Plus, they were winning practically every single game, so not really any reason to change anything.
Yeah, so like they're in a position where it's really hard to reach them because they require. They're kind of like Samsung, actually. They remind me of Samsung. They're so far ahead of the competition that nobody has enough money to pump in to the exact markets that they're in to try to catch up.
Right. Okay. What confused us all there, Crumbz, is when you said Samsung.
I was thinking about
the League of Legends team. You mean the actual company Samsung, right? I see. Yes.
Technological.
Yes.
Tech
Okay. Because yes, Samsung obviously has a lot of things which they have patented and created, which aside from Apple, they have indeed created in a real and a theirs. So pending lawsuits, you are correct.
So the New York Excelsior have run 7 different teams, like 7 different combinations of players, which seems to be on the lower end.
Well, this is also, are you including stage 1 in that? Because stage 2 was lower. It was much lower. I think they only ran I think they only ran 3 combinations of players.
Yeah. There's, let's see, it looks like Jonak. Yeah, and Jonak was always. I can look later for you, Crumbz, if you want.
I guess it would have been.
Awesome.
I guess it would have been 4 because Mono was in for Arc at times. So Jonathan, but that was not because they wanted to. That was because they had to.
So on their own, they barely swap out the roster.
In stage 2, especially, yeah. So
and
yeah,
plus, obviously, the caveat to Crumbz's point, the context is that they do it out of choice, not like the Florida Mayhem, where it's just some sort of death sentence and you just have to play every single game and lose every single game. And the whole time you look around and go, oh, I'm glad we're not changing any players. Fucking hell. Like, obviously, he means real teams, doesn't he? That can actually win fucking games. So
Florida's wise.
It's not counting Gladiators or Mayhem that really just didn't have any swaps available.
Yes, exactly. They had no choice in the past, obviously, yeah.
So, Beezy, you just had to play against the New York Excelsior. And by the way,
on the last episode, we had Wizard Hyung, and he actually thinks that like it's just because he didn't know he was going to play your team. And if he'd have had like a week, he'd have just mapped it all out. You know, he'd have played the match out 1,000 times in his mental dojo, and he'd have Rengifo 0. That's a message from him, by the way.
Yeah, basically, he said... We'll paraphrase it and big it up for him, but he definitely said that he was not prepared to face Philly, that they were not prepared for the upset that you dealt to London, and so they had to make adjustments at halftime. And he said also that they were running their London team comps against you in the first couple of matches without making any transitions. Now,
basically, the least gracious way someone who won the match could describe the match and the person they just played.
It was pretty.
I understand where he's coming.
Sure, yeah.
As the team that woke up at 9 that morning and played a grueling match versus London, and then had to play with about 10 minutes in between to eat and do everything. I don't think we were in optimal condition either. I can't imagine what it would have been like if it was Saturday too if we had played a game that day. But I mean, it's true, right? So the last time when we beat New York stage 1, In that week, we played Shanghai and then them, and I believe the maps were almost identical. They played that week, I think it was Seoul and us. So if you think about the amount of preparation you have, the amount of kind of energy you want to put into each matchup, like I don't think he has a point. I think in a week, the 2 matches, and the map pool can be entirely different. You need to make a choice about where you're allocating resources. So I personally, the way I looked at what happened, I could see the fatigue in our guys. I could see them playing worse. I could see them being tired.
Yes, I in fact did also watch your team composition on Hollywood, which we discussed last week, which we will get into because I want to hear the other side of that composition story.
Regardless, pull this up. Regardless, like, you know, I think it's a fair point. I think.
Okay, what about from your side though? Because surely the same logic applies even worse for you. Is that you can't be preparing for the Excelsior at all because you haven't won the match in front of you. You have to beat the London Spitfires, which is pretty fucking hard task in itself, right? So
let me ask a different question before you get into that specific match. So we talked about how you guys didn't get the preseason. You only added EQO and Snillo at the start of this particular stage. Yep. So in general, what percentage of your time would you say right now is spent trying to figure out your own synergies and optimal rosters and optimize your own strats versus coaching for specific opponents, which generally comes after you feel comfortable with your own roster? So before you answer the question about who you were preparing for, how much do you prepare in general for specific opponents as opposed to trying to grow your team, which is still coming together, because you were so late?
Yeah, so that's a division of labor kind of thing going on. So we have 2 assistant coaches, Hayes and Hui, and a head coach, Kirby. And, they work, Hui and Hayes work very in depth with each squad. So, on a given day, it'll change who's in the main squad. They'll work in depth with those guys. They will kind of more on the development side, figure out what the best things are to do. And then usually what we'll do is, I'll provide the scouting data on the enemy team. We'll know exactly what they played on which point, where they were attacking, and if they ended up winning that point and how they did. So we will incorporate a decent amount of scouting into the specific week prep. But I think in a stage where you have set map pools, it doesn't really make sense to redefine the wheel every time against a different opponent. I think, for the most part, everyone runs more or less the same things. You have teams that have some differences. Like Houston doesn't have a tracer player, so they have to get wacky sometimes. But for the most part, it's about building the team to be the best and not focusing week to week preparation for different guys.
Does the Philadelphia Fusion have an individual mechanics coach?
An individual mechanics coach? If we do, it's Elliot or Hayes. But no, so there's 4 people on the coaching staff: myself, Kirby, Hui, and Hayes.
Okay, so now that we've gotten past that, now we can talk about your match versus New York. So what were your thoughts coming into that match? Did you have what was your prep like for the London and New York games? Because you guys didn't even know you were going to be playing until the Gladiators lost that first game against Boston.
Yeah, so we, you got to remember that night we weren't sure if we made the playoff. We mostly prepped for London. I don't want to say that we didn't have confidence because I genuinely believe, and I'm not just saying this, I genuinely believe we are a top tier team, and I think we can beat anyone in the league. And but we didn't necessarily we focused on the London match. The New York match, we were playing Volskaya. That is a map that we were fucking awful at. And we, didn't spend that much time preparing for it because we figured it was a lost cause. And so we just focused on the London match, honestly.
What do you do then in a scenario like that where the turnaround is so short then?
You make the best of what you have. You don't want to over guys. You want to kind of keep we initially were planning on having off days, Saturday and Sunday. So we let the guys know be ready to come in and practice if we have to. We just had a normal day. We had a normal day of prep. Practiced the maps for London. Went over what we thought they were going to run. And then, did a little bit of the stuff for New York, but for the maps that weren't shared, we didn't put that much effort in.
What plans moving forward are you going to do to increase the resistance of these players? Because eventually you're going to have to play 2 games in a row. All these teams will get to a point where 2 games will have to be played. But if fatigue is something that even in a separate day, is hard to overcome. There has to be like increased resistance in the practice schedule to at least prepare them for this.
When you were playing League, Crumbz, what was the...
Wait a second, you've cut out.
You cut off. You cut off.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What did you say again? Just repeat it.
Like when you were playing League, like in the LCS, what was the longest play day you had?
Longest play day. Let's say 2 to 3 matches. I mean, you could have a day where actually one day you'd have 2 best of 3s. So I think that'd be the longest. Or then you'd have one where it's 3 days and we play a match a day and you have to prepare against every opponent.
What's like how many hours of like league time?
Like 6.
Yeah,
6 would be
6 at the max.
Yeah. So like when do you like what I'm getting at here is like I think I don't think you should play 2 matches with it. I think
that's basically what I thought would be the answer. That you don't think you should play 2 matches.
I think it's shitty. I think I understand why they did it that way. I'm really glad they moved it Sunday, but even looking forward for what we can do for our guys, like we do a lot. Like our team manager Rostin, we have them exercise, we have them eat well. We try to have them go to bed at the right time, but especially for the Koreans, when like everyone they know and love comes online around like 2 a.m. It's hard for them to keep that schedule. But I don't know. Like there's no plans. I think it's a shitty thing to ask these guys to do, to say play at your top performance level for 2, basically 10 maps in a day. I don't know. I don't think there's a way to optimize that really.
No, I mean, especially if you think about the amount of time that it's actually possible a map could extend to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like way more than any sporting contest I can think of, pretty much. It's actually ridiculous how much time you would have to focus in theory. So certainly not ideal.
I can...
With that said, though, you could also go the other way and say that
it's an opportunity to get an advantage over somebody else.
You can just play in the moment. So you might have a scenario, some might even say Fusion maybe benefited from this, where you could have an unexpected result, or you could ride a hot streak in a game where things go well,
Yeah, I don't know. We don't currently have anyone whose full-time job is like, I think Gladiators have that guy Blake, who is like their performance coach, who focuses on those kind of things, which I think is great. I don't know that much about what he does, but
I think Valiant, they don't have their, I think they used to have.
But it's something, I mean, we are working on some things to kind of regulate the guy's sleeping schedule. We are working on things to kind of understand fatigue. I think, especially, I mean, like, look, so if I'm a soccer coach, right, and my guys are playing, I get data on how many miles they do. If I'm a baseball coach, I know exactly how many pitches my pitcher has thrown. And I can tell you that, okay, Pedro Martinez, at the 98th pitch, he's coming out. We have data to back this up. We know about like his health. We know like there's been years of doctors saying like, if you want a pitcher to have like a 12-year career, he can't throw this many pitches. There's a lot of, in the sports world, like kind of this common knowledge about things like that. It's not really established in esports, like how long you can play for before you start fatiguing. So I mean, as an analyst, there's definitely it's an interest to me to kind of try and build that data together, but it's really hard to do. I mean, to try and, because you have to benchmark performance at peak levels. You have to kind of like see the guys as the fatigue of the day. But I think it's harder to make that call. And even though we do have subs, like it's hard to know and take someone out.
So because you are owned by the Flyers / Comcast, do you have access to any of the, and you have Flyer staff? I mean, you talked about Hung, who's coming over on the marketing side, who worked for many years for the Philadelphia Flyers. Do you have access to any of the Flyers sports psychologists or trainers or anything like that? Or is that a priority that you think you're going to see with the team moving forward as a result of you being owned by a professional sports team?
So right now there are there's no like kind of sharing of staff. Hung is full-time on the Fusion. I would hope so. I think, I'm not a hockey fan, personally, so I don't really know how much in-depth stuff they do with sports psychologists, performance coaches, but definitely something we're interested in the long term. I think I'd like to see esports kind of do its own thing. I'd like for there to be, the standard to be that a team has a psychologist, that a team has, a fitness coach, that a team has all these things. But if when we go to Philly, I think we'll be pretty close to the Wells Fargo Center. So, I mean, hopefully we'll get to start sharing some of those resources. But right now, there's no sharing.
Right, as someone who actually beat the London Spitfire, what do you think of where the London Spitfire as a team is at?
I think they're the best team in the Overwatch League. Like, bar none. Like I don't think there's like I think they're incredible. I think
What do you think prevented them from winning the stage then?
When you say they're the best team in the Overwatch League, I think what you mean is that they can be the best team in the Overwatch League at their peak. Are you evaluating peak performance right now or average?
No. I just
they are right now, mate.
Like, no, I'm not.
He's just trying to compliment himself.
I see how it is.
There's
Humble
no need,
brag,
like,
yeah.
There's no couching in that statement. I just think they're their best team. Like,
That would be a pretty sick humble brag. I tell you what, they're almost unbeatable. I mean, they're the best I've ever seen anyway. You know, and when I was playing against New York and they were beating me, I was thinking you couldn't beat me as hard as that Spitfire team would have if I hadn't just exceeded even that and beaten them. So in the end, no, okay. So what makes them the best then? What do you think? What defines them as the best at the moment for you?
When we play against them, I think they're the most purposeful team. Like they, first of all, obviously have incredibly talented players. But I think like sometimes when we're doing like VOD review of the POF maps, you can just kind of see like how disciplined they are with rotation. They don't really make mistakes like other teams do. And so when you're playing against a team like that, like, you know, Houston will fuck up sometimes. We definitely fuck up sometimes. And if you're a good team, you can take advantage of those mistakes. But with London, there's not really any of those misplays. They're just incredibly clean. And I think there's, you know, no one feels good after, but when you lose to a team and you can kind of point to them like winning fights as opposed to you losing them, like that's how we generally feel about London.
They take matters into their own hands. So what do they do? How did you beat them then? If they don't make these, did you just play better?
I think we had an incredible game. I think they probably, you know, whether or not they'll come out and say it, my guess is that they 4-0'd us decisively stage 1. They 4-0'd us decisively stage 2.
Okay, to put this, you know, I do think you're biased because you've spent your time in the Overwatch League getting mercilessly bodied by the London Spitfire to the tune of not even winning a map before you beat them in the stage playoffs, to the tune of you took in total across 8 maps, 3 points.
That's a bummer. I think we just played really, really well against them. I think they probably underestimated us. I think the mistake that they made is, so they played us when we didn't have EQ on the lineup because he was sick that week.
Yes. And
so I think for them it was like, oh, it's the same Philly that we just, you know, destroyed stage 1. And maybe, you know, they didn't necessarily worry about that match as much, because just like with what the New York people said, right? Like they also had to prepare for 2 matches that day. So, you know, maybe they allocated resources more prioritizing the New York match. But I also think that we just played incredibly well. I think Snillo, like, I don't know how people aren't talking about him more. I think he played out of his mind. He had like a 19, which is
Wait
just.
a second, you kind of.
Oh, we talked about him. We tried to talk. We wanted
What are you
to
talking
see
about?
more of him.
He was like 39 elims and like 6 deaths on the last New York map. I did talk, or the last London map. I was casting that match. I definitely did talk about it. He played great.
Yeah, I think he stepped up. I think, and again, like you said, like we didn't have access to EQ until stage 2. Snillo turned 18, I think.
March something over, yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't that long ago.
I forgot Simon's birthday. He'll be mad about that. But we, you know, so that's a tool that see it. And Shadowburn and EQO, to their credit, when they need to flex the tracer, I think are passable players. I think they do okay. They know what their job is and they execute on it. But and so when we want Carpe on the Widow, because Carpe is just the best Widow in the world, and that's again a statement that there's no like ifs and buts about it. I think he's just the best. When Snillo comes in and like it's actually like a really, really, really good tracer specialist, like that's not something that teams had seen us be able to do before. So I think we had more tools than they anticipated, and we played well off the momentum. But I do still think they're the best team.
So I have a question. As the let's talk about the New York. So I told you we get to the comps on Hollywood. So previously we had seen you guys play Snillo on Hollywood. And you did not, you had Snillo in for Route 66. So we played back-to-back Route 66s from the last London game to the first New York game. You won them both, looked great. So what was the logic behind not subbing in Snillo for Hollywood later in the series?
I mean, honestly, like that's a Hayes question. That's a Hayes, Kirby, and Hui question. I think we weren't exactly sure. So Hollywood's a weird map, right? Like the A point is very, very, very different than the street space. And
Sure.
I think we know that we wanted a Widowmaker on the streets, and Carpe's attacked with Widow point A, and he's defended with Widow point A and done well. But I think we also definitely wanted to be able to play some Genji there. We wanted to be able to have, and like when EQO is in the lineup, when EQO and Carpe are both there, like Carpe can play literally and at an incredibly high level. EQO can play every hero except for Tracer, I'd say, like every DPS hero. So there's just a lot of flexibility there. But yeah, to be honest, I that was not a decision that I helped make.
So you can't answer my follow-up question, which is about the comp that you were running on Hollywood, which, okay. Yeah. Well, we'll have to have Hayes on here at some point then, or Kirby again, to have a chat about that.
Crumbz. He thinks
Yes,
London
Thorin.
Spitfire is the best team in the whole Overwatch League. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's peak performance. If you look at them in peak performance, I agree that they look like
what makes them better than New York then for you?
When they, like, New York is consistent, right? New York, when they turn it on, it seems like they turn on teamwork more than anything else, whereas London, it looks like individually they also reach a new level, that they're just doing more as like the thing that I've been noticing about Overwatch is that I think it really has become overcomplicated. I think the game is actually pretty straightforward when it comes to like decision making, and if you end up are incredibly talented and now are performing even higher in terms of looking at what cooldowns are being used and taking advantage of the situations at the finest level to the thinnest margins, and they'll just look amazing. And I think that's what they're doing, where as so much of the game has been like, oh, they saw this, they did this, and they then considered these opportunities. Like, I don't think players think like that. It's really,
you want to know something funny,
instinctually.
Crumbz? Is that coming from Counter-Strike, this is a problem that I actually have with a lot of the people who are the analysts, which is that when someone breaks down a really amazing play in Counter-Strike, they will often do kind of what you're talking about here. Like, they'll be like, see, when he saw the guy here, he correctly used process of elimination to know there could be no one coming from the right here, so he threw his flashbang, turned away, knowing the end. It's like, mate, I can tell you from knowing the players, they don't do any of that. Like, yes, in some part of his brain, there is some unconscious, there's some unconscious instinctive part that maybe is sort of calculating these things and telling him instinctively, do this. But a lot of it is just, you just make the play. You know, you don't really, like, there's no conscious part of your brain thinking, and now, of course, I'll do this. Like, that no one could play that way. No, by the way, no one's doing that in basketball either. When someone does an amazing, like, you know, crossover and then does a spin move in the lane, they're actually just praying in that scenario that no one just steps out and, like, steals the ball from them. They don't really know that they're going to perfectly glide past the defender's hand and lay it up. You know, they're hoping. And because they're the best in the world, yeah, they get away with it most of the time. But the time that they get the ball stolen, they weren't in their brain like, what? It wasn't like an anime, like, what? I calculated this correct. How could he have come? And, you know, like, no, it just happened, didn't it? Like, sadly, we'd all love to believe the game was that thought out, but it's not really, is it? Come on.
No, and a lot of it too is just based off of muscle memory, right? So, you know,
hopefully you just drilling these scenarios,
you instinctively react to a certain situation in a way that has been practiced, not necessarily because you're inputting, you know, you're calculating all the possible outcomes.
Here's the best example.
Here is how it actually works in sports. Okay, so guys like Beezy are there looking at the data, and they come up with interesting, relevant statistics or relevant ways to play the game. And then that gets translated to the coaches, and the coaches say, okay, we have this problem, so we're going to drill in a specific way so the players have it in their brains and their muscle memory and can anticipate how to make these changes in the game. It's not like you're planning for every possible fucking moment of a match and like writing a script that everybody flawlessly follows.
Yeah. Well, the same thing always happened in League of Legends, didn't it? Which is that anytime people made like really amazing macro play moves, you could break it down in this way where you're like, this is correct because look, if you weigh up the odds, like this makes more sense and here's the outcomes that could happen. But in reality, it's almost exactly what you're saying here. What happens is the coach has just drilled you, right? This is the priority of what we do in this scenario. So generally try to do that. Or if you see this happen, maybe this is a response. And if you do a good job drilling them with that on coaching stuff, you hope in the game they do sort of know, I think he said we do this now, right? And then they're not really weighing up the 10 options they have. It's pretty unlikely they are, at least.
Well, it's also...
Like you have like Soon, right? Like he's playing Tracer and it's like, oh man, he loves going for these back caps. It could really just be like he's fed up with his team. He's like, I'm just taking matters in my own hands. I'm doing this shit on my own. And then it looks like that, and it looks like this coordinated synergy of a specific style, when if you imagine that the Valiant have all these issues, then these moves make a lot more sense as just being somebody that doesn't want to participate in any conversation within teamwork. Now that's just speculation, but it certainly makes more sense to me that this is the decision tree that ends up creating these plays a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I'll be less pessimistic and say perhaps it's just because Soon is good at recognizing those situations. Yeah. So the rest of the team plays around him because they trust that he has great judgment, which is unique to him as a player. So they're playing around their strengths. But either way, it's different than I think a lot of people imagine. Now, going back to like the League of Legends or a MOBA scenario, there's a lot, but the other thing people have to remember is there's a lot more time in a MOBA to discuss what is going on the map, and you have 30 seconds to say, okay, what's everybody's status? Okay, we need to make a plan and to talk about it. You think there's that time in Overwatch? No, it's you have to make decisions so fucking fast that it's very difficult to create complicated strategies that play out unless you're like calling specific plays. Like you're sitting there with your playbook and you're like, okay, run play alpha 2, you know what I mean? Because that's what we should be using in this situation.
There's also, I mean, on top of that, right? So Root's a map that we created a very specific set piece for. In terms of like, here's where the payload's here, Widow, you go here. Payload's here, Widow, you go here. And it kind of, because there's the lanes on that map, you can kind of say, this is a set piece. Like, then we go into a scrim with it, and Carpe just like headshots 5. And it's not something that you can really, like, it's Carpe doing Carpe thing. So it's like you have that set up, but then the question is, okay, well, we just team wipe them because Carpe is a god, and like we had this plan, but it doesn't really make sense anymore. So there's like, I think there's a lot of times too, and it'll happen where you'll have your Tracer, like the plan is, all right, Tracer, you're gonna farm Pulse, and then we're gonna go do this thing because you're gonna get this end for free, and the Tracer like misses it entirely. They go for the Hail Mary Pulse. So there's like, I think you're right, Monty, that there's less time to be like, all right, Dragon's coming up in 45 seconds. We know what the cooldowns are in their ults. We know exactly what they're going to do. Let's get vision down here. We practice a million times. Like, I think there's less time for that in Overwatch. So the best thing to do is just drill those basics in and say, guys, like, you know what to do here.
I think what is knowing like what cooldowns get used, and simply you just like you understand the abilities that each hero has, the entire pool of cooldowns that a team has, and then you simply have to keep track of the ultimates as being like an additional cooldown that is being introduced into the equation, and you just balance those every single time. When you're looking at a push coming in, you think, all right, bubble was used. What does this mean? And that's drilled into your head. All right, this matrix is running out. What does this mean? How can we play this out? That's really all that it is. And so in a team like London Spitfire, back to the same thing, when you have individual players that can recognize all these situations a lot on their own, then it looks like a team that is very assertive and it looks decisive in their decisions, as opposed to one that gets fights just won by the mistake of their opponents.
Yeah. And to that point too, like my guess would be if you asked like Poco, like what the duration of the Zarya bubble is, or like how much damage that Zarya does, like which is a 50% charge. Like I don't think these guys would be able to answer those numbers with those numbers, but like he knows exactly when that bubble's wearing off. He knows exactly how long, like when D.Va uses her defense matrix, there's like a cooldown there, right? Like they know exactly how long those windows are, even if they don't, like they couldn't tell you the numbers. So
yes,
there's, it's whatever the 10,000 hours thing, right? There's, you learn the game so well. But I think one of the problems with that is as we talked about earlier, when you have a meta that changes, and I think you have guys that say like, okay, like I know Lucio's had ultimate after this much time. And then the meta changes a little bit, and Mercy's there now, and she's doing, or not Mercy, but like, there's different people being played, and Lucio, there's like a small change that happens where he's now maybe farming all slower, and people don't incorporate that because they've had those, months of time with it. I think that's when the muscle memory kind of, and like not memorization, but like repeat learning stuff, I think that's when that kind of fails, when people need to adapt.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes people just make mistakes or mistake that players are often a lot less calculated than the analysts and the coaches are the ones that are generally the calculated ones. The players are playing off of instinct most of the time, or intuition. And it's really up to the coaching staff to translate data and observation into the player's instincts and intuition. Like, that's the job, is that the information has to come in and then get transmitted to the players so that it becomes an instinctive response. So people, I think, some players are very analytical and do think about this way in the game, not to the depth that I think that people ascribe to them a lot of the time. Like Thorin, it does feel like sometimes people think it's like a fucking anime or some shit. In terms of their,
it's because it would be a cooler storyline if it was, if someone really did think all that stuff. Yeah, they'd be awesome, but no one can do it. Come on,
it's already enough drama here for being an anime.
Exactly.
I think it really varies. Like Neptuno is an example of an extremely analytical player. Like he'll make these like really complicated plans in game. Like there was this time on Junker where we ended up using our blade and not baiting at the enemy. We were in a bad spot. So Neptuno says, "Okay, guys, we're gonna use tire like it's blade right now, and like use the tire to kind of like get around the supports, and we were able to continue the attack on point too because like he made that quick plan." So I think there are a lot of times that happens, but then there's also times where like this is a mistake that I see all the time. So pro diva players will like the fight is lost, it's over, and they're right near an edge, and they get demeched, and they'll still press Q because they have they know that, all right, I'm getting demeched, I gotta get back. And it's like, all right, well, no, if you hadn't done that, you'd have it for the next fight. So I think there are a lot of, like, there are certain things where people just play off instinct and they play suboptimally. But I think a lot of players do. I mean, I know a lot of the guys on our team. It's not the anime like freeze frame, like, oh, like he has this, but it's close.
That's how people imagine it, right? It's just like they see like it's not, all the action just like moves in bullet time, and the player's like sitting there like having this internal monologue where he's like, I know that this player will hit this with his left hand, or like he's going to shoot that rocket 2 inches to the left. So if I dodge this way, and then I will have a path to this player. And it's just like, come on.
you ever watch Hikaru no Go?
What?
No.
What is that?
I think you have vastly overestimated Monty's knowledge of anime here, by the way.
It was like Yu-Gi-Oh except with Go instead of the card game.
Oh yeah, I know about that.
If I put this piece here, like he'll do this thing. Like
yeah, but that's like a turn-based game where you could have an infinite amount of time to think.
Right, I'm saying I think that's what people maybe give expectation of, like, oh, like, and they're literally sitting in front of like a little box with pebbles on it, and it's like this epic moment of like brain games. But
AlphaGo was really epic. You guys, did you see the AlphaGo?
Yes.
Mate, we can't even get people to watch Overwatch. No one's watching fucking AlphaGo games. No one. People read the news story and that's it. No one watched it, right? So anyway.
I watched it. I used to play Go.
So, not even CSGO, the only fucking good Go there is. Right. So, what about the Seoul Dynasty, Beezy? Because this is a team where the storyline has been the same every single split. They always have like a weird loss where you're like, fucking hell, why? How have they lost to this? Then they always have a period in the stage where it's looking good. And then they always miss the playoffs in a tie where they're not the one who advances from the tie. And so they have never made a stage playoff yet. So there must be something wrong with the Seoul Dynasty.
Well, I think, Monty, you were over when we were watching them, right? For the match that would have clutched them.
Yes, I was actually at the Fusion House with Beezy and Kirby watching the Houston Seoul game, which obviously Philly was super happy about because that gave them a much better chance of, like, an almost guaranteed chance, in fact, of making the playoffs.
But I mean, at that moment, like I think I told you, I was like, we're not going to the playoffs. And then they played Bukid. They didn't play Flood. It's just, so it's like, I don't know. They have the pieces. I think they are I think generally speaking, the acquisitions they made post Lunatic High made them better. I think that they're a team that that core's been together forever. I expect them to be doing better. They just make weird decisions sometimes. Like I think that's an example of tinkering with the lineup too much. And I don't know if it's because they didn't respect Houston that they played their with kind of their B squad, or if it's that they genuinely thought that Wiki was better. But they should have been in the playoffs. I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Because, you know, unfortunately, like, people are going to think that that's a weird statement, like that they might have not respected them. But if you actually think about it logically, right, if they had made the playoffs, they are going to play both of the Korean teams. They're going to play Spitfire and then potentially New York. And if you know anything about Koreans, it would not be at all outrageous to imply they might not want to run their real squad in what they think is the easy win last game anyway, and then go and play the other Korean teams who are going to be watching their game right there. That's not some mad conspiracy. I could believe that that's plausible, you know.
Yeah, so
knowing how these teams are with their rivalry and how they think of each other.
Yeah, that shouldn't even matter though, because they slip up all the damn time, because they lose games against Shanghai every time. They lose games against San Francisco that they shouldn't have lost. They just keep dropping random maps. Like, sure, the last one looks like the culmination and just the ugliest thing, the biggest mistake, but they could have just not lost the games against Shanghai, and that would have made a big difference. Why would you run your B team and just tell them only play dive this entire game? You can't switch comps.
Yeah.
Because remember, at the end of this, the biggest difference was that Seoul and Philly finished with the same 7-3 record stage 2. The difference is that Fusion had plus 12 maps and Seoul had plus 9. And to what Crumbz is saying, let's take a look. They dropped a match to San Francisco in week 1. They dropped a map to Dallas in week 2. They dropped a map to Shanghai in week 3. These are teams that they are pretty categorically better than. They couldn't take a map against London in week 4. They got 4-0'd. And then they lose to Houston, and then they drop a map to Florida, right? So the only way they could have stayed in, by the way, so even after they lost to Houston, remember that they weren't necessarily out. They just had to win all their maps against Florida, and they didn't do that either. So, I mean, what do you say when you lose maps to basically all of the bottom teams in the league? You can't even complete a sweep. Disappointing.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the other things too is like Overwatch up until now has been like not even a majors type thing. It's just been like tournaments, right? This is the first time there's a league environment where you're playing consistent matches. So I think there's, some teams will adapt better than that. I mean, we went to game 5 for Shanghai in the first stage. And, we actually finished stage 1 with a winning record, but a negative map score. And I think... Yeah, thank you.
Barely winning, getting blown the fuck out when you lose.
It's kind of a unique accomplishment.
I think, yes, so somewhere someone will give us credit for that. But yeah, I think the league environment is one that Seoul's maybe not used to, and that they had this success in Contenders, which was just a tournament, right? Sorry, not Contenders, Apex, which was just a tournament, and maybe they're having trouble adapting to a longer format.
I think they have too many coaches. I think this is a case of too many cooks in the kitchen where all the coaches get together and talk amongst each other. And then they're like, we're going to develop this super sick game plan because we're going to finely tune our roster to perfectly counter this other team. And then they're like, yeah, we shouldn't play Fleta. And then they just don't play Fleta because they think they have a better strategy that doesn't involve Fleta, when really they should just be being like, the answer is simpler. Just use Fleta and build a strategy around him.
And you've got to add in, obviously, again, we're back in an anime because there's the classic move like, but Fleta's our best player, sir. Exactly. They'd never expect us to take him out, which is like, that always sounds good on paper. I can tell you that always sounds great until you realise, well, the reason why they'll expect you to use him is he's basically by far your best player. So wouldn't really mean. Basically, they would expect you to do things that make sense.
Which is exactly like, I'm sure Houston rolled in and they're like, oh, what a relief. We're not playing against Fleta. Cool.
Yeah, I'm sure they were like, what do we do? Help. They haven't put their best player in. How can we possibly respond? This is a nightmare.
It's like, they must be outsmarting us in some way. No, I'm pretty sure. It's like, oh, good.
Sir?
This is nice for us.
So it actually turns out that the strategy we had planned against Fleta is working even better against a worse player. Oh, God, continue. Shit, we never thought of this. Damn it. I know, it's mental, isn't it? I'd love to be in those meetings, just a fly on the wall, hearing that.
So yeah, I think they're like outsmarting themselves in certain ways at certain times, and we can argue whether that's because they think there's strategy or whether that they're cocky enough that they think they don't have to play Fleta. They're trying to hide strats. But the problem with this entire conceit is that we have to go back to the fundamental fact: is this stage playoffs don't fucking matter. They don't matter.
It's hard to tell that the guys who just lost $100,000.
Oh, yes. Divided how many ways? Like 16 ways on your team? Come on. You each get, and then like how much like obviously, it's some amount of money, but compared to their salaries and compared to what they can win at the end of the season in the playoffs, it's nothing. Yeah. So my issue with this is like, if you are going to put a lot of prep into a match and your soul, you should probably put more prep into your regular matches that you shouldn't be losing, because that makes more sense for the end of the actual season, where the playoffs that really matter are going to happen, rather than trying to do well in the stage playoffs for what is, when it's all said and done, when the team takes its cut and when it's divided a zillion ways, you're talking about, I would say optimistically, like $5,000 or $6,000, which in these players' lives is not that significant.
Can I share?
Oh, what were you saying?
Can I share a quick stat that I've been running?
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah,
so
please.
The London Spitfire, and this is some proprietary info here. The London Spitfire are the best team at dealing damage efficiently. So the Shanghai Dragons, 57% of the damage they deal to their enemies is healed. So over half. And the London Spitfire, it's actually about 46%. And they are the best team at kind of dealing efficient damage. And conversely, they actually heal the largest percent of enemy damage done to themselves with like 53%. So
what you're saying is that they're very good at diving, collection, and killing people before they can get healed, and also simultaneously keeping. Well, I think that it's, when you say they heal more damage, that's probably just because they kill somebody so fast. We know they're great at diving with Prophet and Bird Ring and Gesture. So when they heal, it's probably because they're in a 6 versus 5 and it's harder for the enemy team to heal them, would be my initial thoughts about that statistic, but it is very interesting.
No, it's a statistic specifically about Gesture's bubble usage, as he's able to block the healing of other members and skew the numbers in his direction.
Exactly. It's all Gesture.
Yeah. I felt like I made this statement, the best in the league, and I think this is obviously, it's with statistics, you kind of have to take them, you have to interpret them like you said, Monty, like, if you're a dive team, if your team that plays only dive, you're probably going to have lower, you have more efficient looking damage. But I think it's indicative of how polished they are.
Sure. So let's talk about your stats, the Beezy stats. So you have shared with us a piece of the Beezy database, which is much more generous than Wizard Hyung did last week, where he only alluded to the existence of his database without giving us any information.
He's like some Scrooge McDuck character who just keeps all his wealth hidden away, and his only life goal is to make sure none of us ever get access to it. Where some people like to share the wealth. So, thanks for your magnanimous gesture.
I think
I like how you say Scrooge McDuck instead of just Scrooge. The original character who is known for doing that.
Nah, Wizard Young. I think he's more of a comical character.
That's true. That's true.
The problem is that guy was genuinely evil.
So back to you, Beezy. Let's discuss where the Beezy database comes from. Would you like to describe what the Beezy database is, where the Beezy database numbers arise from, so that people get a little bit of information about what it's like to be an analyst in the Overwatch League?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is that, like, with the whole dragon hoarding data thing, like, I think what I've learned doing this job is that a lot of these stats are things that are you can talk about in the analyst desk, like, oh, that's neat. So what? So like for a stat like this, right? Like, I just told you guys about the damage efficiency thing. Like, no other team's analysts are going to be like, ooh, okay, like now we're going to do this. It's not actionable information, though.
Yes.
So I think it's weird to be like, that's why like I try to do like editorial stuff. I think for the most part, the use of stats is about interesting ways to talk about the game as opposed to actionable.
Well, the funny thing is, Beezy, that's actually not even something that I think is like just specific to Wizard Hyung. Monty could talk to this. Koreans in general, I don't know if it comes from like superstition or something, but they have a very weird attitude to like the idea that like you should let nothing get out there that your enemies can get. Even if, as you're saying here, like, some basic stats, anyone can do something with that. It's more about who the person is who's going to interpret the stat, really. So like if you're playing a terrible team, they're not going to do anything with that information. But famously, Koreans are like super locked down about everything. Comms, whether you get any insight into what they were doing last week, who they practiced, they can be very weird about that sort of stuff, like keeping it all under wraps.
But yeah, back to your question, Monty. So there's a few different sources. There's the CV guys, so Winston's Lab, and I think Visor is also in the space now. Where for example, I can tell you that when we do some of our scouting of other teams, I just, instead of using Blizzard data, I'll just use Winston's. Because they're generally quicker.
They also provide things that, in an easily digestible format regarding like team compositions or time on certain heroes, because that's information that they can track without needing any access to an API.
Yeah. So they're great. I think my boss would be upset if I talked. Speaking of kind of hoarding information, we do. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Orbital. We do have a similar internal system for keeping track of kind of solo queue meta, which is not taken from those sites, but from a different approach. There is Blizzard also does provide data to us. I think Monte, last time you were over, I showed you some.
That's what I want you to talk about. I want you to describe what they give you, because it is really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much I can say about it. They've been, which I know is not what you guys want to hear. There's a lot. There's more information than I would say you're able to get anywhere else. For example, if you go to your career page and you click through Mercy, there'll be stats, like we get stats that do not exist in that kind of environment. So there's a lot going on there. Honestly, one of the things that I've been trying to do for the past few weeks, because we only got the data at the start of stage 2, is actually even just digest it all and figure out what we can do with it.
Because you get it in a very raw form.
Yeah, it comes in very raw, which for me, I prefer it that way, right? Because the harder it is to use, the more valuable I am as an asset to the team. Right?
Who doesn't prefer it raw?
in a way.
Yeah. It's like if anyone can interpret it, you don't need. So when I have to write code to bring it in and make it usable, it's job security. But even past the making it usable, I mean, you have so many matches every week. We have like some tick rate data, like basic kind of snapshots of the game, similar to what Winston's Lab does with their, this happened at this time, but like it's more regular. So a lot of that comes from Blizzard, and then, like I said, we do some of our own data ingest. But to be completely honest, we're still I'm still trying to figure. And every week we kind of we're evolving a little bit our understanding of it. One of the problems is that by the time there's enough data out there to really start doing something useful, like it's mid stage, right? Because even if we're now playing the same maps as stage 1, it's a different map. So it's like it's hard to know when you have enough data to say something, or when it's just like the result of, because let's say like after the first week, I was like, oh, Monty, like London has the most efficient damage stat, and they played Shanghai and Dallas now, right? You'd be like, well, it's not really about London. So yeah, we're still working through it, but there's a lot there.
What do you think of the stat? I don't think it exists here, but I personally think it'd be very useful. Hero proximity.
What do you mean?
Like how close two characters are to each other
at any given point in time.
At any given point in time. Yeah.
I think that would be incredible. I think positional data is actually a thing you could do. Like, where is your Winston dying? Like
right. How far away is he?
Where's Lucio when Zenyatta die? I think for a lot of these pro players, they're all really smart. Not all. The guys in our team are really smart. Not that other teams are dumb.
Teams are fucking idiots, though.
I'm just saying, I know for a fact the guys in our team are, and but they're also pretty stubborn. So I think what the real power of data is, it's not necessarily to understand things that couldn't be understood regularly, but it's to say to a player like, hey, you can't argue with them. So if it's that Neptuno is always far away from Boombox when he's dying, like things like that I think would be really helpful. And we have some of that in the data. It's just not. It's only in relation to kills.
Exactly, because that's what I think with a stat like that. It's so simple and so digestible for a player that there's just no counterattack. It's like, all right, well, you died 1,000 meters away from your supports. That seems like a problem.
Okay, so the team who were the biggest losers in the last week of Overwatch League was the LA Gladiators, because this is a team who thought they might be able to go to the playoffs. They thought this was their stage, perhaps, and they were looking like the best Western team. But in the end, it did collapse in on them. So, Crumbz, what do you think of the Gladiators? And obviously, yes, a revamped team, but when you take aside stage 2, they're actually down in 8th place overall in the league, because obviously the first stage didn't go that well, and then actually their record did level off and they finished 6-4 even in this stage. So where's the Gladiators at for you?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that I don't think they're the biggest losers of the stage. Come on, that seems
It's
like
in
a
the
big,
context, by the way.
Even in the context. So I think
what did I say? What did I say, Crumbz? I said that week.
You said a context.
I said that week.
Even in that week, I think there were bigger losers.
Right, what did the others lose? They were already in last place. They couldn't win anything.
It always gets worse.
No. If you're in last place, you can't win anything. So Shanghai Dragons didn't lose their mental state. They haven't had a mental state for a long time.
So Gladiators, I think right now are exactly in the first topic we discussed. They got the Korean creep coming in. Fissures coming to the team, and now everything. The honeymoon period is over, and then now it's starting to sink in how much work they need to do to get everything solved. And then, all right, bring in more Koreans. Yeah. Here comes Void. Now he's got a main tank or a flex tank to help him out. He's got the DPS there, and so we'll see what happens with that. But that seems to be the trajectory they're in. They're letting Fissure, or at least enabling Fissure even more through more Koreans that he knew.
Just got to make sure that those Koreans boosted.
Is that a bad move? Is it a good move? What do you think?
I don't know how it's going to be as a move, because Bishu was translating before, right? So I'm not sure that seems to me like one of the biggest aspects of the game, communicating the back line to the front line. So if Bishu's not there anymore, I'm not sure how the hell what that's going to turn into. It seems like a bad move.
No, that's the genius. It's the stepping stone approach, because what happens is now
you seclude them.
There's no one to translate, is there? Well, there's only one solution, isn't there? If we were all to speak Korean, bloody, how would that work, eh? So, it's genius if you think about it. I think it's a good move. I like it.
Yeah, it's a subtle infiltration, but that's really it. Like, the honeymoon phase is over, right? So much can happen about Fissure. Fissure, I think we were watching one of the games, maybe it was against Houston or something, but he definitely has some moments where he feeds. He just jumps into people and dies on his own without anything to even trigger these decisions. But it's still enough to help the team out. But now teams are figuring how to deal with Gladiators having Fissure, so they just need to amp up the roster more.
What do you think, Beezy?
Speaking of teams that figured out how to. There was a team called the Philadelphia Fusion who played the Gladiators in the final week of Stage 2. And this was as important as to you guys making the Stage 2 playoffs as was the Seoul loss to Houston. So when you came into that week and you were looking at the Gladiators, it's a pretty convincing win, I'd say, overall. You were, as Crumbz was saying, killing Fissure quite a bit. You were focusing him pretty heavily. So what were your thoughts coming into that match?
Just that, like, focus him down. I mean, I think it was on Nepal, he literally got monkey ult like before the point even tapped in. And like we were sitting there, was like, how do you tell your guys to anticipate that? We focused him down. I think, to the Glad's credit, they made more improvements than just him. But it was clear that he, from watching their other games, like, he was the one creating space. He was the one like really leading the team. So we just said, focus Fissure down. Don't let him be in there. Don't let him do stuff.
See how simple the game can be. See how easy it is, right? You see a guy that's good, you kill the guy that's good, you win the game.
So that was it. That was the extent of your game plan, or you don't know the extent of your game plan because Hayes, the other coaches?
That's the extent of the game plan that I think is smart to talk about.
Okay, all right. You'll only talk about the obvious parts. Unlucky. So yeah, you guys were coming in, and it was, I think a lot of people had tipped Gladiators to win that, given that they were on this hot streak, but you guys handled it really effectively and pretty much shut them down. So I agree with Crumbz, and we talked about this last week about how much Bishu does for team comms, because the other coaches had that insight and saying that, when Harsha and Wizard Young were talking about it, saying that Bishu is crucial to that team beyond just translating, but also in terms of their in-game adaptations and general in-game leadership and shot calling. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Void. I think I read that the Gladiators said that primarily Void was coming in for Roadhog and Zarya, which is weird because Void was always one of the best diva players in the world. So that seems like sort of a strange way to shoehorn that in. It seems like Fissure really wants his former tank partner there more than anything else, and that they'll work around perhaps his hero pool in other ways. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's whatever teams put out statements, right? There's press in mind, and you want to be careful because if you say, "Hey, he's coming in to play diva," you're letting everyone know that Bishu is going to be a bench player now, right? Like, then that's not necessarily good for the players, and it's not necessarily good for the team image. So
that's a private conversation to have while eating a kimbap with him.
True enough. So, and then Gladiators also went 0-2 this week in general, playing against Boston. My personal read on that was that more than anything, I think that was probably a morale issue because they had to win 4-0, and then they lose the first game, and I think they just were like, fuck it after this. Because they knew that their shot had been ruined. So I'm not reading too much into the Boston game.
It's true though. It happens with them, like when they get ahead in a couple of games and they know they don't need to win. I think it was some other maps. They definitely won 3 already and just screw it, do whatever we want for the last one. So they'll let go of morale very quickly, whether it's a win or a loss.
I will say I'm very grateful that we were the first match that week. Because if they had played Boston first and they had 4-0'd Boston or 3-0'd, and then I do not envy them having been in a must situation. I think it's tough.
Certainly is. So,
right. What about the Boston Uprising team then? Because this is a team which has finished both stages with decent enough records. Yes. At times, they've been in a position where people thought they were very good. They've overcome any of the problems they've had in each of the stages. They've had a couple of weeks where it looked bad. Where do you put this team at, Beezy?
I think that they are a mid-table team. I think that there was hype surrounding them because, remember, Boston, before how we do it in Philly, Boston was just the meme of the league, right? Like, both in terms of play roster and everything else. And then they come in the preseason, they lose to New York, not as magnificently as people were expecting. And then they start beating some decent teams. I mean, they're 4-0 to stage 1. I think that they're a mid-table team. I think that Casper's really good. But I think that part of the trajectory was that people kind of overhyped them after they rose out of meme status.
Yes.
And I think they're doing fine. I mean, I don't know how much you guys follow the esports drama, but all the stuff that Slasher is posting about Gamsu and being unhappy and there being a Korean uprising. I mean, I don't know how much of that is necessarily true, but they don't look like a team that's breaking apart from the inside. They look like a team that didn't spend a lot of money on players.
Do they look though as though this is we know who they are basically? They don't really have some ridiculous trajectory to keep going up and be the best Western team, and they're kind of who we expect to be, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they're a mid-table team. I think they might make it into the playoffs.
Right now they're in 6th place, so they're barely in the playoff picture as we look at them at the moment. So I think they're ahead of the Valiant now because the Valiant did not have a very good stage 2. But other than that, I don't know. I think that unless they add more players, they're unlikely to drastically increase in terms of their quality. I think they're happy being, like Beezy saying, a mid-table team, but I don't see them making super serious upward move or downward for that matter moves for the rest of the season. They should be pretty stable. The
question is, if I'm looking at the table right now, Gladiators, Shock, and Mayhem are beneath them. Shock's a team that I think is going to have a really good stage 3. And so if you're Boston, right, and you've been a mid, I don't think they don't have. There's nothing that they've been doing recently that makes you think they're about to go up. They're going to start getting chased by these the Glads and the Shock, the teams that actually did make moves during the
even
season.
the Valiant is making moves too and may make more, so it's hard to tell. So unless Boston, it's possible that Boston will add players in the next couple of days, which may change things. But if they don't, I definitely agree with San Francisco on the rise, even Mayhem on the rise too, right? There's more teams that can steal, and Gladiators, there's more teams that can take matches or at least maps off of them, and fewer teams for them to beat up in the standings. So I think, BZ, I think that's reasonable. They could definitely drop.
Yeah. I mean, even Crumbz. Shanghai might be good.
Crumbz, what do you think? Well, that's not
all right.
About Boston?
Yeah.
I mean, the team is...
You don't give a fuck about Boston. You're so bored right now.
No. I'm just...
How long? God, come on.
I know Gamsu personally, and I agree with what Beezy said. It doesn't look like the team is falling apart from the inside, but they're running a coaching strategy that I'm very intrigued by. And to me, this team is really the epitome of the long-term play of Overwatch League. That's what it looks like.
What is the coaching strategy here?
Their coaching strategy is that coaches have the final say of everything, and they literally dictate the players and how they have to play. right? So I've never seen this strategy work in any other esports. So I want to see what happens in 2 to 3 years if the lineup remains the same with the same coaching staff, or at least the coaching staff that is trying to have these decisions happen. So Boston right now just seems like players that might be even better on their own if they can play their own style. However, they're willing to sacrifice that for the sake of teamwork because they've been told, or however it's happened, they've subscribed to this idea. Okay. But it just takes a long ass time. You know, how can you show up and be told how to play the game strategically and on an individual level, and then just simply nod and follow orders the entire time? I think it's going to take a long time before we see really what Boston can do.
Yeah, I agree. But you have to remember that this isn't merely a Boston Uprising strategy.
Yeah, it's Patriots.
It's a Patriots thing, right? It is a mirror of the way that Crafts run all of their teams. They will find a very strong central leader, like Bill Belichick, or like Huck in this case. They hired Huck to be this guy. Like, I know that with 100% certainty. They hired Huck because they want somebody like Bill Belichick. That is literally true. And they want a strong central vertical structure within the team of power. That is what they like. Coach has absolute authority, and they want coachable players who will meld to that coach's vision first and foremost. So it is all about coach vision on that team. And it's worked extremely well because they have such a good coach in Bill Belichick for the Patriots. And it seems to be at least working pretty well in this case, because they are, at least with a roster where nobody initially thought that this was going to be a talented team, they have managed to identify talent, perhaps as Beezy says, on the cheap, players that were not huge names in Overwatch coming into the Overwatch League, and develop them into a playoff team. So in the long run, if this development can continue, perhaps they will be successful. Do I think that they're going to be successful necessarily this season? They're not going to win the league, but if they can continue to develop the players over the long, perhaps that will be in the cards on a long enough timetable.
I think the interesting thing is, how are they going to acquire players, though? Because if this is the idea that they're running through, every single player that they're looking at has to be willing to fit into this narrative. So they will just likely be going for more and more players that are, again, players on the cheap. So any big name players are probably never going to go to Boston.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, because okay, so I think Boston's strategy would be first and foremost to identify that talent early and coach it into being star level talent, because that is frequently, like, it's not like the Patriots go out there and they make big free agency acquisitions for star players. Traditionally, the Patriots star players have been developed through the draft, or from identifying this talent and then honing it. So I think that that's going to continue to be their philosophy. And as for complementary players, I think that if you look at Boston and you're like, okay, I can move over to Boston and then supplement this strong team, and I believe in the leadership of this team and the strong coaching, then sure. Like, I think maybe some players would be attracted to that.
Yeah, the thing that with all this,
this needs a big player base and a big ecosystem already established for it to work.
True. And also the thing that the Patriots have is that they always have their pick of those role-playing free agents, because everybody wants to play with the Patriots because they have a history of dominating the NFL.
Which is the mechanism that doesn't exist for Boston. Because remember, there's two factors here. One is that if the coaching staff actually has full say, then the coaching staff will then be judged on their results. But if their results aren't that good because the players aren't that good, because they're in a catch-22 scenario, aren't they? So in this situation, it will work only if they are a very successful team, I think, because then people would want to be a part of it. But I agree sort of with Crumbz there. Like, if I was some star player and I heard about this system now when they're not like one of the top teams, I'd be like, I think I'll take my chances even with some of the teams that look worse now if I'm going to get to be myself and do what I want to do, you know?
Sure. I also think that, but at the same time, it's hard to judge the coach. They have, by all metrics, exceeded expectations.
The one thing that does benefit them, though, is that I think it takes away a lot of the pressure on the players, where the players can feel the failure be a lot less personal than, or even any community lashback, because apparently fans from Boston are very outspoken, that if it all falls into the coaching staff, then the players have a much easier time dealing with that.
I'm from Boston. And I can go to that's true. We had a winter where there's a bad snowstorm, and we demanded that the trains step down. Like
Oh, sorry. What are you cut off?
Like two or 3 years ago, there's a lot of snow in Boston, and like the subways, which also go above ground because we're a terrible city, shut down for like a week, and then like people demanded that the head of the MBTA, which is resign. Like there's
what?
Yeah, it was.
That's not even sports, dude. That's traffic.
I'm just that gives you an idea. Like they're very intense.
What he's saying is, if the Boston Uprising ain't running in the right direction, if they aren't fully operational, then Huck must be fired. I think I've read between the lines there. So, you know, I took a pulse of what was going on there, and I translated it, into hyperbole, which I know you are incapable of interpreting, Crumbz.
Yes, that's the only, because you see hyperbole. If you ignore hyperbole, Thorin, you can.
I wouldn't exist without hyperbole, would I? I'd actually have to come up with like real statements and analysis.
It's the only way to deal with passive aggressiveness. Just ignoring it, and you take it as literal all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, what about then another one of the teams from the West that's had success at times? Obviously, this stage was harder for them, but they did end up with a decent enough record, was Houston Outlaws. Now, they had a period, Beezy, where people were really down on this team at time in stage 2, and they were like, this team's just done, like, nothing works about this, they've got all these problems. Obviously, everything focused around this narrative of the lack thereof of a tracer player. What do you think overall of where Houston is?
I'm not totally sure. I think the tracer thing is very real.
Yes, anybody with a brain thinks the tracer thing is very real. Even a bunch of people without brains think it's real. So
it's hard to evaluate that. I mean, so like I think when we watch Jake play Tracer, he's actually very smart about it. Like when we went up against him, he'd never fought. Like he just ran away because he knew he'd die. And so he did the Tracer job fine, but he's never gonna. I mean, like he doesn't hit pulse bombs. He's not gonna win those 1v1 duels versus Tracers, and the team gets punished for it. So like I mean, Muma, I would say is. I mean, he's definitely of non-Korean main tank. I think Muma's top tier.
Agreed.
Cool Matt's a very talented player. Linkser is insane. Finland's gift to eat. And I think their support line is fine. I think like if they had a Tracer player, they'd be winning.
I have a theory. About you.
Crumb's theory. Come on.
All right. So the leader of Houston is Jake, right? You have him as the in-game leader of the team. Now, what do we know about Jake as a player and as a person? He's a smart guy. He likes to think things. And the team has been very outspoken in their overthinking of their situation. And I think that's really just what's been happening, because that permeates from the leader into every single other member, inside game and outside of it, of what's actually going on. And they just go into these complex situations as to how they need to fix where they're at, and it just hits nowhere because they've overcomplicated. They've overcomplicated the way to look at the game, and I think that's just the way that the players are as people. It's not really any danger. It's just a matter of recognizing, okay, we've gone too far in this line of thought. Bring it back. What's actually hurting us, and just start from there. So
exactly.
I think it's leadership.
Because what they did was they kept overthinking things. They were like, how do we make Jake work in this
team?
And
then the start, right? They overthought the roster, taking Linkser out.
Exactly. Can clockwork be used here? Should we do this? There's got to be some way it can work. And then in the end, they keep it simple, stupid. They just got a Korean.
Every time
even they've got a Korean.
Which is like such a very strange signing, by the way.
What do you think of this move then, bringing in Arhan?
I just don't get it. Like, Arhan has played some Tracer in the past. Obviously, he's most famous for his Genji play. In my mind, Arhan has always been a stubborn player. He is, I feel like from watching his games, he can tilt easily, and that when he's frustrated with how his team is playing, he will try and all in ways that are overly aggressive and get him killed a lot of the time. Teams have to play around Arhan.
So he's a man, is what you're saying. Cool, I'm liking him already. I'm in. He's a man's man. Let's see it. Let's go, boys.
Yeah, but does it actually solve their problem? Remember that this is a team, again, we keep going back to this, that could have signed Davin, that would be a dedicated Tracer player that has experience with Linkser. What does this do for the team? Is Arhan playing Tracer? Is Linkser going to be playing Tracer while Arhan plays Genji for possible dive compositions? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, obviously, this has something to do with Tai Rong being the coach of this team and him having worked for years now, honestly, with Arhan on Africa. So he knows the player better than anybody, and maybe he feels like he can make the necessary adjustments to slot this player into the roster. But just based on my observations of watching Arhan play, he doesn't adapt to teams. Teams must adapt to him. And it isn't the expected signing that you would necessarily, or I think outsiders, including myself, would necessarily add to this team.
Right, if everyone wants to play a fun game where you can guess who might join teams next, just go and find who the Korean coach is and look at every player that used to be on his team. So you can probably guess
that's actually
stage 3
accurate,
and 4 of the Overwatch League. So just go ahead and have a guess, guys. What do you think, Beezy? This is an interesting move because obviously this was the team, notably, that had no Koreans on their squad.
Yeah, which I think was neat. To be a truly Western,
especially because they didn't suck as well. They were actually a good team. Suck. Yes.
I think it's weird. Davin is a talented player. I know the Giganti guys would be a fraggy. Like the team was not traumatic at all. Like it's not like they had internal issues and they were successful to the end. I don't know. Like maybe Mendo is going to finally be a human on that team, and or maybe Clockwork's put in a lot of time on Tracer, and so there's things because we don't scrim them that frequently, so it's very possible that they've been having guys in the lab just mash out Tracer, and they have someone who's gonna come up and do it. It just it feels weird. It's not like especially if you're gonna add a Korean to the team. There's a lot of time.
How about Stitch?
Where's Stitch?
Now, to be fair, we do know that Flame has discussed, I think, getting Stitch. Trying to get Stitch earlier, and I think a lot of teams did want Stitch at the start of Overwatch League, but that Runaway wanted to stay together, so it wasn't nobody could get Stitch really.
Yeah, but now with Kaiser, there's I think it's we haven't sent any inquiries to Runaway. I think we talked to them early on. It was clear they wanted to stay together. They actually had a whole pitch based around that, where they kind of sold the idea of having a sister team in Korea and how they could help build talent. And I think it's a convincing one. But yeah, I don't understand this pickup. It's on the scale of Dallas picking up AKM as the weird, probably the weirdest acquisition I've seen to trying to think what was one that made sense. So Gladiators getting Fisher. If that's the range, I think it's on the weirder side, but
it's definitely on the weirder side.
I don't know. We'll again, they're a team that's 5th place, right? They're 5th place without a Tracer player. That's impressive.
What the team has said is that Flame said that Arhan has a super good attitude, and that they feel he said on Twitter that, I think, to paraphrase, I will not get this entirely accurate, that it seemed that they were having a lot of internal issues in terms of, we were talking about earlier, maybe not having the confidence or second guessing themselves, and that Arhan brought an attitude that they thought was going to be the biggest difference in the team, which I'm not inside that team. I don't fucking know. Seems optimistic to me, but
I think they probably have they said candidly, after we first swept them in stage 2, they're that tilted the shit out of us. They went on a pretty terrible streak after that. They were one map away from losing to Florida. So if it's something that they think will bring stability and confidence to comms and the team environment, maybe again I think there's been a lot of times where we've made decisions that have seemed weird to the public, and with all the information that we have on the inside, it's oh no, we have EQO getting sick that week, and fans saying, oh, why aren't you playing EQO? He's so good. And us, we wouldn't necessarily we weren't sure if he'd be able to play because he was kind of getting over it. So we didn't want to show our hand and be yeah, he's sick and that's why he's not playing. And people assume so maybe there's stuff behind the scenes. All these things going on. It just still feels weird.
Crumbz, what's your take on the Outlaws?
So what I missed what we discussed. I already gave you my take on their overthinking, but what is the topic?
They've added Arhan.
Yeah, so I don't know who Orhan is.
Yeah, there's going back to the Apex days.
Yeah, it's a Korean it's a Korean player. I would have thought that if I was Houston, I would make a very large bid to Dante, try to get Dante from the Shock.
That's true too.
That to me was the one that made the most sense. But obviously, they want to keep him, but that to me seemed like the perfect synergy for this team. You get to keep it, be completely non-Korean, great player with flexibility.
Yeah,
About to be out of a job.
Yeah, I think that's like Dante would have made a lot of sense over to Houston, or like I said, Davin too, who was not on a team if it was going to be too expensive. I think Dante is probably better, but also less likely to actually go through. I don't know. For me, you can say that Arhan is going to help us out in terms of some sort of intangible, but the problem for me is that the way Houston wins is they were in a patch where their very passive play style was rewarded, where they can sit there and play Widow Junkrat duels with you 24/7, and they had a good Mercy player. So they were perfectly outfitted for that. We can say, oh, wow, well, they ended the season with this win against Seoul. Well, Linkster, first off, played out of his fucking mind in that series. And also, Seoul was opting into the Widow duels, and they were opting into the
without their best player.
Eventually with their best player.
Sure,
eventually with their best player.
He got bodied too.
Yeah, he did get bodied. He definitely did. But I think that it's tough because Houston can say, okay, well, we're winning all these games, but it really matters how they're winning, and how they're winning is when teams choose to play into their style. When teams now don't have to because the meta has changed, and can choose to play them in different ways and to kill Raucus over and over again, which has been a problem, where he's not adequately protected, et cetera, they don't have the tools. So I think that looking at Seoul, this win versus Seoul at the end of the season, is a bit of an outlier, because it was them getting to play, once again, the style at which they are very comfortable against a Dynasty roster that didn't even field its best play.
I think that's really what it manifests itself into. It you have a team that plays around their tanks, yet you don't have a solid tracer, super solid tracer that makes the tank play that much stronger. And so very rarely do they get
he's died.
Assertive in how they want to win in their games, where a lot of the times it'll have to rely on an opponent's mistake to be a little bit much bigger than it would be if you otherwise had a tracer that can prompt those mistakes. So it becomes a team that it has to wait a lot more for those opportunities. So even though they might not be playing defensively, they actually just have to wait because they're not able to craft the same situation that other teams with a better tracer would.
Yeah, they can't rely on clutch plays from the tracer to exploit. And they don't have very good synergy, as we've talked about last week, how important having good synergy between your tracer and your Winston is, and they don't have that. I think it's tough, but we'll see what it does. I am extremely skeptical that this actually solves their problems.
So, Beezy, you already alluded earlier in the episode to the fact that you think the San Francisco Shock in Stage 3 is going to be a good team. And obviously, this is finally when they're able to bring in these players that they've been waiting so long, and everyone's known from day one they're going to try out in their team, and potentially they're invested. Basically, if you look at their strategy, they've invested their entire Overwatch Season 1 into these players and the fact that it's going to work. So, do you have some inside info? We've heard from the past episodes that they have used some of these players in their scrims, etc. Yeah. What do you think of the Shock for Stage 3? What should we expect?
I think they're going to be scary. We scrim them. I think, no disrespect to Nomi, but I think he's one of the weaker tanks in the league. And I think Super's a really talented player. So like that right there alone, like think about what Fisher did for the Glads, right? Like kind of reinvigorated that team. I think that's huge. Sinatra, I'm not really sure what to say. He didn't look very convincing in any of the matches he had. And at least the Shock, I know that they don't run in-houses. So, we would see him occasionally in scrims early on, but I don't think it's fair to judge Sinatra on that performance, because I don't think he'd had as much scrim time as you would want a player to have before coming in. But yeah, I think just on Super alone, they're good. And then you think about Moth, who's I also don't know much about him, but I also think Dak is from what I've heard, a kind of hectic comer. He'll always be talking, always be saying something. and I think not actually, I think he's probably on the lower end of the league. So I think those two acquisitions, even forgetting about Sinatra, I think they're already scary. I would expect them to be maybe not a stage playoff team, but definitely in the top 4 or 5 at the end.
And they have Architect as well, remember?
That's right. Yeah. So like a lot of pickups.
Top 4 or 5 is pretty bold. That's a pretty bold prediction. That's a big turnaround.
Up there with Philly.
I would say so. Not like not season rankings, but for stage 3, if they finish 4th, I would not be surprised.
But if you're predicting them to finish like 4th or 5th, just to put the actual numbers on it. So last stage, the top 5 teams all had a 6-4 record or better. Like, so you're basically predicting them to be like 6-4, 7-3. That's very good. That's a huge turnaround considering they were 3-7 in the last stage.
Yeah, well, they are changing like half the active lineup, to be fair. So,
I mean, I think they also they have solid infrastructure. I think the team is set up for success. I think it would probably be the Korean teams in the top 5, us and Shock. I think that's how the stage will end up.
So Gladiators just not even going to be there anymore.
No, I mean they'll probably be 6th.
They're done. See ya. Wait until stage 4 when they've got all the Koreans, right? Crumbz, what do you think about this team and the Shock?
Oh, the Shock? Oh, I definitely agree. Listen, Monte can even confirm that I agreed with that statement even weeks before now, that the Shock would be a great team on stage 3. But it's what they've paid for it, right? This is if they weren't a good team in stage 3, that's when you start really getting worried. We've been waiting for this team to come online like a glacier, just melting away some sort of prehistoric mammoth. And if it doesn't do anything, then there's going to be a lot of worry. But these players should be in the most important roles for this team, replacing main tank, replacing support, replacing or getting more DPS that can be more flexible. So they have all the pieces in play, so it just needs time. But it's just a issue that they're doing it with only 2 stages remaining, so they're not going to have a lot of practice time. So if we take, say, the Philadelphia Fusion as an example of what it looks like to start from very little practice to actually seeing how good you can get, in 2 stages, they're likely not going to be amazing, but they'll definitely have an upwards trajectory the whole way through.
Okay. Are you buying this, Monte?
I definitely am. I'm really excited to see the new roster. Obviously, I've been on the Architect hype train for a while, so to see Super come in, who I know from talking to the team is a very vocal in-game leader, and people really respect his call-outs. Maybe young, but still in-game serves as a primary shot caller and a leader. I think it's like really going to be interesting to see what they can do.
Right, since on some of the past episodes, we have obviously many times discussed the Dallas Fuel because it's one of the teams where, of the teams that have done badly, they have the biggest profile. They have all these huge names and they, in theory, have a lot of money behind them, all the resources, basically. So I want to get the take of these guys that we haven't talked about. So Beezy, wade into this. What do you think of the Dallas Fuel shit show? You can remove the part shit show and just say Dallas Fuel.
I think that Envious enjoyed being the only Western team with real infrastructure and money, and I think they coasted on that versus relatively weak opponents who did not have coaching. Like
all of the Korean teams when they won Apex.
I think the game.
Come on, that can't all be the only factor. You can't be like, oh, it's their infrastructure, and money.
Well, how many years? Like, how long ago was that?
That was a long time ago, but you remember even in their
2016.
Yeah, but even in their last season, they still play. Even their last season of Apex in season 3, they took top 4.
Right. I think they were a team that was overrated in a lot of ways, and I think that they made these changes to the roster, including adding XQC. I mean, look, full disclosure, I think XQC is a pretty good tank player. We looked at him as he leaked on his stream.
Well, I think everybody agrees he's a good tank player. He's definitely an owl-capable tank. That's so frustrating about the situation is he's not a shit player.
The point I was going to make though is that we looked at him and I think evaluated that due to kind of his personality and the way that he was acting not be a good acquisition. Fuel did not reach that same conclusion. I think
at least not initially.
At least not initially. So I think they were overhyped. I think they were over because they'd had weak competition. I think they came in and everything just snowballed down. That I would not have expected this. I would not have expected them to continue to make such poor decisions. Taimi won main tank. Seagull accidentally playing Diva because Taimi was taking like shit or something. And now like the addition of AKM and Rascal, who on, you know, I don't know if it was Twitter or Discord, just like ripping into each other. Like I don't know what's happening. Like every team has problems. Like there's been times, you know, I don't think it was surprising when there's been times where the guys have been upset. You know, we had, especially when they got here late. You know, we can say all we want. Oh, it was issues that were out of our hands why we missed preseason. But for these guys who, you know, are really competitive, they were upset. They were frustrated. But none of them went onto social media and kind of criticized the organization or the coaches, the teammates. So I don't know. I don't know why there's so little, because like they're playing poorly, but it's not just that, right? It's like everything else is going wrong, and I genuinely don't understand how.
I have a theory.
Oh yeah,
another theory. Come on.
Yes. And I think this is a very good theory, like all the other ones.
He's giving a review of his own theory before he tells us the theory. Right? Okay, well, you hyped it. Come on,
Critics
then.
love this one. Right. So the team obviously was playing in Korea the whole time, and I don't think they enjoyed their time in Korea. I think it was actually too long of a time for them because these players
confirm that
right. We can confirm.
I will also confirm that there were other outside factors. Well, not outside. Yeah, outside. Okay, there were other factors that had nothing to do with being in Korea that were causing problems within the team that I think greatly affected their personal enjoyment of Korea.
Yes, so their personal enjoyment at the time was not very good, and up until that, they were just playing tournaments. It really was no kind of grind, and so leaving Korea was almost like a release for them.
He's just dead.
Wait
there a second, Crumbz. Wait, it lagged a second. Say again. You said like leaving Korea was a release.
Right. So leaving Korea is a release. They finally get out of there and go into a more stable pace, and then they go straight into OWL, which is the most fast-paced thing as possible. And the only thing that happens in a scenario like that is all the previous issues that you have are just going to be multiplied. Like going into OWL and that schedule is basically like having a really fast metabolism, where all the shit that happens to you is now just going to get compounded even worse. So you have players that have confidence issues with each other that might not have shown in Korea that actually end up happening here. You've got players that just maybe don't feel like they're up to the task or are down on themselves, etc. And that combined with what I can say to when I look out on the outside and the team is doing shit like that, to me, I always initially just point to coaching staff or some sort of authority within the team. It's either some authority needs to take responsibility for managing the organization. And I think the amount of issues that happen are probably so delicate that it feels very weird for somebody to step in and try to handle these situations, that they're being very cautious in how they handle them. That just makes it even worse, because sometimes you're just going to have to go or really lay down the law and say, no, shit is going to be different. It might have been all fun and winning or at some point, but right now the team needs somebody to be the bad guy. I don't think there's a bad guy on the team. Somebody to just say this is not going to be acceptable and it needs to change, because each player's emotion is just permeating to everybody else and not cutting it. It's not good.
And just as far as your theory, do you take some of this from your own personal experience, because you were on like playing professionally in League before LCS existed, and you were playing in tournaments, and then you joined LCS as a league? Did you find that this happened with your own team at the time? Is this something that you felt that acceleration once you were actually in a league structure?
Yeah, for other teams as well, because before you had a lot of time to sit down and review it, but now in that change, you don't have any of that. And I think that it's not just the Dallas Fuel, the length and sheer time, the turnaround between matches is so little that a lot of times you're focusing exclusively on the game, and you get into the situation where you're thinking, well, there's this emotional issue that's happening with the team, but it needs to be put on the back burner because strategy must go first. We must figure out this other thing beforehand. Who's playing what? Who's doing this? And so that just gets put once, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and everything is just going to become that much worse because there's things lurking in the background, which is why you need a sports psychologist and you need somebody to just sit down these players and make a little.
Oh God.
tested the entire thing that Rascal did. I thought that was
you liked the game,
worst.
Right? You said you need a sports psychologist to sit them down.
Yeah.
And then
the Rascal thing was he makes an entire essay and then he writes, I'm not going to point any fingers, but this guy. I'm not going to point any fingers, but this guy. And then he keeps saying, I did this, but I meant that. I did this, but I meant that. It's like, you didn't even tell anybody what you meant. And you're blaming them for your misinterpretation while pointing fingers at somebody else. That is just on top of utilizing social media as a tool against their own team. That's so fucked.
Well, I guess what's so confusing to me is like, it seems like nobody on this team is actually capable of talking to each other, which is weird because they have Violet on the team, who is a longtime NV former StarCraft player, was a manager on their League of Legends team, and now is a manager on their Overwatch team who is Korean and is bilingual. And you'd think like Effect and Rascal would have a way to have their feelings known to the rest of the team without having to result to either Effect just like going on a stream afterwards and then just monologuing about all the garbage, or like Rascal writing these long posts or his own stream. It feels like everybody from the Dallas Fuel, they get out, they like finish their scrim and they're like, all right, everybody do their own room. Now, everyone simultaneously tell your own version of events. And it's just like, it's fucking ridiculous. Like, just talk to each other for fuck's sake. It's not that hard.
I prefer this version of Dallas Fuel Rashomon where I just put together who did what.
That's coach or staff or management, because management should be the one that grounds them all and has them talk to each other. If that doesn't, I don't expect players to do the whole idea of gaming houses and whatnot is for players to worry about one thing only, which is playing. Everything else should be the responsibility of others. So why is the coaching staff or some sort of staff not saying, go talk to each other and get shit resolved? Because this is the part that somebody needs to take that job that's not a player. That shouldn't be an in-game leader that decides this. It should be the staff.
Beezy, when you play against Fuel, obviously they've had to run many different lineups because they've added players and they've had XQCs suspended half the time, etc. But when you play against them, are there any areas in which they are capable and they're a threat, and there are aspects to the game where even if they're going to lose the game, you have to watch out for this aspect? Can you give us any kind of light at the end of the tunnel on this one?
They were pretty good at Junker Town, where they could run Orisa Hog. They were pretty good at that. That's
all right.
That's all I got.
You didn't like Numbani?
Okay, guys. Let's not pretend that they're like, why people want us to talk about the Dallas Fuel is because in their last week they played New York. It went to 5 maps. They played London. They took a map off of. They had a hard week, and they did look better with Mickey on the main tank and Seagull on the off tank. So I think what Dallas fans want to hear right now is that there is some sort of light at the end of this tunnel. They were playing a lot more Rascal, and we can't argue when they go to 5 games against New York that they do in fact objectively look better. Correct?
Okay, but the timeline, Monty, is like, it's like, oh, this hope, and I'm pretty sure then the OGE suspension, right? Then I think that's when AKM. It was after that he did his Discord thing where he was like, oh,
Rascal did happen too.
Yeah, so it's like there's this hope, and then all of a sudden like all this shit happens.
Okay,
shouldn't be happening.
I know we're railing on the really dumb way that they're handling their press and their own, inter-team communication issues. But at the end of the day, they did objectively play better in their final week of Stage 2. They had 2 tough opponents.
Technically a match that the opponent didn't necessarily need to win.
Of course, that's also true. But at the same time, I think that we had seen Mickey on Orisa and on Winston at times in Stage 1. It was a strategy where they were flexing him to these roles. Seagull did actually look pretty decent on the Diva, and they were playing with a lot more strategy. Rascal was coming in and performing well on his own. So I think that the frustration of the Dallas fans is that you see matches like this where you look at these players and you're like, you guys are all individually very fucking talented. What the hell is wrong with it? And I agree with Crumbz saying that there's not time necessarily to deal with these issues while the Overwatch League is rolling. But based on their performance of the last week, based on the fact that at least in the last week they haven't exploded, OGE is going to be nearing the end of his suspension, I think, in the next couple of matches.
Which is complete garbage, but...
The thing is, Fuel just needs someone to get up there.
Tell why is no. Expand on that. Why is OG suspension complete garbage?
I'm gonna use a metaphor here that might be not the cleanest. But like if the NFL has like a hard line against drug use, right? Mm-hmm. And they say like drug use is not okay, and like a player gets caught with like a little cocaine in the system, and then another player gets caught with a lot of cocaine in the system. Like you can't 4 games to only 2 which will be served versus a 30-game suspension is just like you can't say we don't approve of boosting and then give a suspension like that. And I'm not sure what the motivations were. Like, and again, people will say, "Oh, well, Sato was more involved in his org." I'm not going to.
So really, what you're saying is, to follow on your analogy, not saying that any of these players are guilty of drug use,
right?
OGE was caught with a small amount of cocaine and/or some cocaine,
bindle, just a little bit, just personal use,
And Sato, meanwhile, is caught dealing
with a kilo.
Cocaine.
Yeah, he's got a pickup truck that he can take you around.
You don't think that there should be a difference?
What I'm saying is that if you're like, I think normally yes, but if you're saying like we have a hard line, hard line,
zero tolerance is zero tolerance.
Exactly, yeah. It's like you're on one side of this line, cocaine or no cocaine.
Basically, Beezy wants to be one of those countries where if you steal anything, they just chop your hand off. Like there's no sentencing, just your hands come right off.
It's actually Singapore right now, where he's just putting the death penalty down on anyone. Death sentence for anyone.
Okay.
No, I
actually thought you were going the other way. That you were going to go that it wasn't, it's too harsh. I didn't know you wanted it more harsh. So you should have been suspended for the whole season or stage or whatever, right?
Yes, and I personally think, and this is my tinfoil hat now, above my oversized headphones, is that I think the league was afraid what would happen to Dallas if they took OGE away. Like I think obviously we all succeed together in a way, right? If the Overwatch is popular,
that's quite the claim.
Yeah, but it's just like it pisses me off a little. That Sato got 30 games and he got. I made a little snarky infographic on Twitter. I basically just took from the Overwatch League website all of the suspensions, all the disciplinary action, and there's just
half of it Fuel.
I saw that. I like that one.
Half of it is Fuel, and then you see Sato's bar. So everyone's like 0 games, 0 games, 0 games. Time was saying homophobic slur, 0 games, all this stuff. Sato 30 games, and the language they use. This is the really infuriating part. Is they use the exact same language in their official statement for Sato and OGE. Participating in boosting activities. Okay, so whether or not from Ti that Robin guy on Reddit or from other invent sources, we all know that Sato was more involved. The official statement from the league was identical for both of those guys.
I do agree that the wording of the statements from the league has been pretty poor. I will agree with you on that one. I do think that you could offer more context, but I do
explain the severity of the thing.
Yeah, I do also. I don't know. I do understand why Sato who was definitely more involved versus OG, to my knowledge, was very limited in his account boosting. It wasn't really part of a larger structure like Sato was. There was definitely, I know, consideration of the severity of the claim. Like I said, there's a difference between sitting around with dealing out kilos of the cocaine as opposed to being caught with a small amount of it in your pocket or some of it in your system. Let's just.
I'm not trying to be willfully ignorant of that. I'm just saying it's again, when you have a hardline stance against something, it doesn't matter, right?
So then, do you also think there should be a hardline stance on multiple other subjects inside the league, or everything?
I don't think he's no. I don't think he's arguing for that he at all critical of Blizzard allegedly having this hardline. I don't think most reasonable people agree with hardline stances on punishments, right?
And I don't know how familiar you guys are with Sato's story, but there's more there than just they're painting him like this criminal mastermind. If you meet Sato, that there's no way that's true. He's I don't think boosting's a good thing. I understand it ruins game experience for people. I think it's, if you are a member of the Overwatch League, you should not be boosting. But I think he was a young kid who came from a very financially not well-off family.
And he was hustling. He was out on the street. He was grinding.
Right. And I also think that people will look at it and they'll say, like you're saying, if he's not part of a financially well-off family, the reason why a lot of Korean pro gamers get into esports is because they're not good at school. It is a way that they can make money for their families who are often poor. And I think that, yeah, exactly. And so they either flunk out of high school or, they're doing really badly. And this is the best way that they can make money. It's not getting a job at like a convenience store. They can make more money doing this. And they're trying honestly to support their parents and their siblings. And so,
well, Monty, I mean, one thing that actually people might be shocked to find out is that if you ever look into any of the match fixing cases that have happened in Korean esports, it is not like it would be in the West. If someone in the West took part in match fixing, very likely they already are maybe involved in some sort of criminal element, or maybe they are kind of like a very selfish, fucked up person. But actually, in Korea, a lot of the people who've been caught in the match fixing cases were just young people who needed money, and unfortunately, an opportunity presented to themselves that, I mean, in some cases, if you're 15 years old, you're not really in a position to make a responsible decision in that scenario anyway. So as much as it might sound like we're trying to sort of like plead the case for them, there is some context there that's very different from how it would be if someone did the same action in the West, is kind of my point.
Yes, and also it's extra important to remember that before Overwatch League started, there was not anywhere near as much of an opportunity for a player to make an income off of Overwatch. In fact, if you look at traditional sports...
Well, none of the Kesper teams were involved, so none of the big orgs in Korea basically had Overwatch teams at the time. So
and I can tell you, from casting Apex and being part of that scene in Korea, the players were making very little money. And so when you're in a situation where boosting potentially gives you a better opportunity to make that money to help out your very poor family, then players are going to do that. So I think there should be some forgiveness in a way, because there was literally not a way to make money, or at least not enough money, before Overwatch League existed. Now, I think that if you are an OWL player and you're boosting now, it's much more serious. But if you look at, I was actually reading an interesting editorial in the New York Times that was arguing for better legalization and regulation of sports betting. And one of the examples that they gave, this was a former editor over at ESPN, I think it was ESPN or Sports Illustrated, that was writing this article, this opinion piece.
It's going to be a way to track the people doing the betting, right?
Well, sure, but the one of the arguments is that if you go back in baseball history to like the 1919 White Sox that were throwing the World Series and were part of this whole betting. But the thing is that now the athletes are compensated to a degree that it makes no sense for them to take a risk in terms of throwing matches, or in this case, in terms of boosting accounts on the side. If you're paying somebody a lot of money to do their job as a professional, they just won't take these risks anymore. So the argument is that like it's a lot less of a problem to have sports betting now, because you're just not going to encounter the same problems of athletes getting involved in throwing these matches, and that the highest instances in sports today of players fixing matches is in like lower tier tennis, where you have 100% control over a match, and that these players are just not making very much money at all. So I think that this is the long way to say that actions before Overwatch League began, I think, should be treated with more kindly, because these players were in different circumstances and maybe didn't have a way to make money like they can now on full tracks. So it's a different.
It's just like League when it first started, when absolutely everybody was boosting or DDoSing or all sorts of things, and then when it came out, some people got banned forever from the Overwatch, from LCS, or some people got year-long. It's not even years.
Remember, we only found out about this recently, but actually, I believe it was 2013. Mark Merrill, one of the creators and founders of League of Legends,
by the way,
had someone boost his account.
He is the president of Riot.
He had someone boost his account because even he wanted to be higher in the game.
I played threes with him and the boosting partner, and we got to like rank 1 in Twisted Tree Line.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah. I played threes with him in the boosting part is exactly the same as saying I was the third boosting partner. You realize that, right?
Yeah.
That's not. I just invited to a game. I did not make any money off this thing.
Crumbz is just one of those guys.
Player.
He was just riding along. He wasn't doing any of that shit. You know? He was the lookout.
That is funny.
That's his job. Yeah. Crumbz was associated but not tainted by the scandal. That's all you need to understand.
That's funny. Yeah. No, that's just a joke. It's not exactly the same. Was he paying for this guy to do this?
I will not disclose more of this situation on camera.
I'll ask you about it later. This sounds very funny. Anyway.
Anyway, all of this somehow ties into the fact that Dallas Fuel is shit, but Monte thinks that it's turning around somehow.
Well, look, we can't argue that it did look better, which is why I think it's been the whole bait and switch for the Dallas fan base, because every time you start to get up hope, some other random bullshit comes and plows it all to the ground. So. And
do you have hope, Monte, for stage 3?
Not really.
So after all that, even Monte just bailed out.
No, there should be some hope. I think Siegel is the beacon of hope here.
But apparently Siegel is talking about being traded. Now all the rumors are coming out where it's like Siegel wants to leave.
Exactly. He doesn't like to be part of these messy team environments.
He's the one that he's saving it, and then he wants to leave now because he's being put in this position where he has to save this team.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't really blame him either. He's like, I don't know him that well personally, but like he just seems like a really nice guy. And like, imagine like you're in a team environment, everyone's angry, and they're all acting, I wouldn't be that surprised if like in like 3 weeks, what if Siegel has one of these things, right? Like this guy who's like the face of PMA, like comes out with like a Twitter rant about how like idiotic all of his teammates are. Like, that's when like things that they've really broken him.
If they can corrupt Siegel, then there's no hope.
Like he's trying to get out now before it's too late. But the reason I brought up like the Twitter stuff, Monte, is because like I do think that's the cycle where like they'll look like they're playing well, but they need to hold it together to actually have anything meaningful happen, right? Like. And so then, they're playing well, but then the stuff on Twitter happens and the Discord messages, and you're like, oh, well, no, it's not going to change.
So back to Crumbz's point from earlier, I do think that this is a team that could seriously benefit. Look, now, I was running this team. What I would do is I said this publicly, I was like, do not let anybody stream. Do not let them post their own statements on social media. You black out all of their social media until this problem resolves itself. And I would have taken this break. I would have given them a few days off. And then I would have just like done escape rooms or team building exercises or fucking anything outside of the game to get these guys to maybe like each other or work on a different project together. Like Crumbz was saying earlier, get a fucking sports psychologist in this mess. Like it is. The clear thing is that they're not communicating with each other and they're not working as a team and they have these issues. So you need to resolve that first while you have time, because when you're so focused on the strategy, you don't have that time. So I would be throwing all the strategies out the window if I were them right now and just focusing on the interpersonal and communication ends of things and trying to set a new system in place. That's what I.
Plus, I mean, at this point in time, you've got 2 whole stages to tinker with these things. You guys aren't making the playoffs. You're not doing anything in the Overwatch.
Yeah, exactly.
So season 2 is really what you're all about. So take a couple of stages off, figure things out. Have fun with it. Just find the love of the game again. Stop taking things so seriously.
Go into the mountains, do some like team building, trust falls, high ropes courses,
and if needs be, one of you doesn't come back. No one has to know why. Accidents happen. What can I tell you? The American countryside can be very treacherous and dangerous.
And isolated.
As long as at least 6 of you come back, ready to play the Overwatch, that's all I'm asking for.
So the Valiant takes their players to In-N-Out, and then Fuel brings them to the desert and leaves them there. That's the
it's like the Hunger Games. Whoever survives at the end on the Dallas Fuel.
Joshua 3 is a big place. There are a lot of people. You can get lost in there pretty easily.
He meant to go to the dead. Like he meant to come back, but they just didn't understand what he really wanted.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know what? Some of them can't follow directions. We're blaming other ones for leading them in the wrong direction, and some of them just never made it back. So, all I'm saying is, Rascal, you might need to work with people to make it out of this one. You heard me. Right. So, what about this then? There is a team left called the Florida Mayhem, who actually, considering they were so bad early on, have gradually sort of built things together. They obviously have these Korean players who are going to come in. Saya player, awesome guy, so there's potential for difference there. What do you make of this team, Beezy?
I'm optimistic. It really confused me when Misfits didn't, like, they lost EU contenders, and then we're like, oh no, this is fine for Overwatch. And I think the fact that management, like, has realized that's not the case, I think is a really good sign of the team. Like they're willing to make these additions. The Zappos acquisition still kind of confused me a little bit. I've heard from other Finnish people that he's more flexible than people give him credit for. So it's possible I think he's played support competitively before.
He has, yes.
Yeah. So it's possible they're grooming for that. But then, like, to see him come in on Hollywood in the diva role, and they lose that literally every time, it's confusing in that regard as to what the plans with him. I'm optimistic about Florida again. Like, they're a team that they've lost a lot, but they seem to have strong morale still, which I think is really important. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't expect them to do a shock level rise stage 3. Like, maybe they can finish 7th in the stage. But again, like, I'm also not that familiar with Awesome Guy. The other Saya player is the other one?
Saya player, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with them. So, I mean, maybe they come in and then they do huge things. But it's going to take a lot for Florida to get there.
It's a classic team of organization. Being like, we don't have to spend that much money on this, and we'll make it by. And then realizing, wait, everybody spent way more. We need to have a bigger buy-in and spend more money. It'll take some time. All right, guys, just cruise by until the very end. We'll see what we can do.
And it's not like the Overwatch League slot was cheap either. That's the other thing.
Exactly, right? Like, if you're going to shell out so much, you thought you'd put some chunk of that aside, thinking you don't buy a Ferrari and you don't account for insurance.
Yeah, like what are the payouts? I was looking at this the other day. I think the prize pool is like just for the regular season. The difference between like 12th place and 8th place is like, I think 100K or something. Let's see.
Yeah, because you do get a prize pool for your standing at the end of the regular season.
I wonder what the Shanghai players are going to do with their share.
It's 12 places, only 25.
Buy diapers.
Buy diapers. Not anymore, after Undead has been cut.
Okay.
Undad.
We'll get to that. There's only one team left. So Florida Mayhem.
Florida, Saya player was primarily known for his McCree and Widowmaker play. He played with Libero on Meta Athena and was their hit scan player, whereas Libero was mostly their flex or projectile player. I think that this will allow them to better run. I mean, Tavik has been good though, but better run maybe Widow Tracer on certain maps. I'm actually not sure how much they're going to play Awesome Guy or Saya player right off the bat, because they seem to be improving as it is, and I don't know how much value they are going to add in terms of individual skill, because that really hasn't been the problem that Florida has faced. Swoosh is playing better these days. I think, honestly, and you talk about Zappos can play other roles, but I think he's also a very good emotional core for the team. And for me, the biggest thing is I think they just get more practice. They changed houses, so they are now over closer to the studio. Beforehand, it was taking them 45 minutes to an hour each way, which is, if they're there 6 days a week, is 12 hours a week of lost practice time, which is 48 hours a month, which is significant. I think that the changes in their house, the changes in the fact that they have like a driver now, they're adding Ryder as a coach as well. He came in and they started to actually counter strat better, more practice, better environment. I think all of these things just boosted morale. I think the biggest thing to me is that they made changes on the lifestyle of the players, which improved morale. And that has been, I think, very helpful. So for me, it was mostly an infrastructure mayhem that I think is the cause of their improvement.
It's almost as if infrastructure has an incredibly important part in the results.
Yes, of course. But here's the other thing is you talk about them spending such not as much money, even though they bought this asset. But the thing is that the asset is still worth something at the end of the day. If they don't have to spend more money, they can sell the asset after however long the contract says they can't sell the asset for. So for them, it's not like they don't believe the asset will depreciate, but perhaps they as an org. And remember, Misfits as a team is not. They're a pretty cheap team. Let's put it that way. They aren't splashing out the big bucks there over in League of Legends and PNLCS. They're not the ones that are making the big star signings. they're pretty conservative financially.
Well, the interesting thing is, let's see if they actually are in the franchise ULCS. If they aren't, then that actually will definitely play into your theory here. So we'll see on that one. Okay, I've got a question here though, Monty. Surely what you've just mentioned plays into this logic though. They have Ryder, formerly of Meta Athena. They now have Sireplay.
And awesome guy.
This work?
Also both of Meta Athena.
I think he's going to insert them the first time they have a fucking problem, mate.
Well, there's still mineral there, right? So it's not like he is in total control of the coaching situation.
Is he or isn't he? So what is the point of this guy being here then?
I don't know exactly how they've divided their roles on the roster.
Exactly. Can we get some more transparency, Florida Mayhem? Maybe some sort of reality show? Maybe, in fact, actually, don't even wait for your team. Just start telling everyone on Discord. It'll get back to me. I just want to know what's going on. Tell me, guys. Come on. Let me know what's going on. Swoosh, don't just let those guys fucking do you dirty like that. Tell me the real story. I want to know what's going on in this team. Whose fault is it? All I need to know is whose fault. As soon as I know who to blame, you can leave the interrogation room, interview room. All I need to know is who to point fingers at. That would be a great name.
You're ready to join the Dallas Field, Thorin.
I know I am. That would be a name of a great fucking reality show for the Dallas Fuel. Who's to blame? And this week on Who's to Blame, we're going to be featuring AKM. Now, who do you think's to blame? Let me guess. Anyone but you. Yes.
I would. Right, continue. I think Who's to Blame is too straightforward. I would call their reality show. Everyone goes under. You just take turns, you know?
Okay. Or you could call it fire sale, because you're trying to figure out who to get rid of from Dallas Fuel. So you're trying to figure out, right, obviously everything's depreciating like a motherfucker because the building's on fire, but we can rescue some of these items. We can either rebuild a new house using that item, or we can sell this item while it still has value to someone else and start over with a new house. Which route do we go? That's the question for everyone to figure out, including Hasro. Right, there's one team left, and there actually is some news here, Monty. This isn't like usual where it's like there was two storylines for Shanghai Dragons. Wow, they're really bad. Okay, insert jokes. Or they're bringing in these Koreans. Will that change things? There's now a third storyline, Monty, which is that sadly one of the players who was actually good in their team has left, DPS player Undead. And if you saw his explanation, fucking hell, I didn't know there was so much like emotional labor going into being a player. He had like a whole like life cycle. Like he had a love that he then lost. And actually, he doesn't agree with you, Monty. It's not better to have loved and lost. He wishes he hadn't lost that. He literally had to leave the Overwatch League due to this. The stress, all the games he's been losing. On the upside, though, they have signed someone called Creed as their assistant coach, and they will be welcoming him with arms wide open. Which I know you wanted to know that, Monty. That's very important. You didn't know where that was going, did you? But just an in-joke for people who watch these shows long enough, right? Wasn't serious in any way there. I have no information on this guy, Creed. But anyway, what do you think of this team? Because it seems like, unfortunately, despite the positive of bringing in the Koreans, it can't be a good thing to lose Undead if you're this team, right?
I mean, so Creed was a player for Miraculous Youngster, is now serving as a coach. Who knows why they couldn't just get these MY players to begin with. I think, God, I've said this before, but watching the Shanghai Dragons, I actually am starting to believe that they are in some sort of like Greek afterlife punishment. Like they are actually in like a sort of Sisyphus or Tantalus situation where they like constantly push the boulder up the hill, but then it just rolls back down, and they just keep doing it over and over again because they can't catch a fucking break. Okay, so they bring in Korean players, and they bring in a Chinese support player to help them out in those positions. And then of course, as soon as that fucking happens, scandal with one of the positions they don't necessarily have a problem with Undead, and now he has to leave the team, and what the fuck is going on anymore? Who knows? I will say that perhaps the upside of them losing Undead is that previously their entire strategy was put all the resources into Undead and pray to God that he carries. So maybe it will force them to diversify their strats a little bit. That's the only upside I can see. They could have done that regardless of whether Undead was on the team or not. However,
But Monty, they're in a Sisyphus-like situation. Then shouldn't that be the perfect time to try whatever they want, since there's really no point whatsoever, and just keep throwing shit to the wall?
I guess. I mean, I guess that's what they're going to keep doing, right?
I mean, at this point in time, I would just tell the Shanghai Dragons, don't focus on the wins and the losses. Just try and play better.
I mean, right?
That'll be $10,000. That's my consulting fee. Thank you. I've got to get to my meeting with the Dallas Fuel, if you excuse me. Anyway, come on, Beezy. You haven't weighed on this one. You've been awfully quiet on this particular topic.
Yeah, I like them so much. They're really, really
What do you like about them?
They're just swell guys.
The org guys are actually really great. The management for Shanghai are really nice guys. I don't know. I've heard a lot of like different rumors about like how the construction went down, and like at various points people saying that the Miraculous Youngsters were too young to play, and then people saying that they weren't.
Yes.
Oh yes, because honestly, that has always stopped Chinese people from competing in international competitions. Has been the age of their professional athletes, right?
Somewhere the Olympic Committee is having a laugh at that.
Falsifying some birth certificates actively. Yeah.
So yeah, from the inception, it seems like it was kind of a troubled thing. And I don't know. The language barrier is very real. I don't know enough about like Chinese or Korean. Like I know Korean is supposedly a fairly hard language to learn to speak, easy to write. I know Chinese is also a really hard language to learn to speak.
They're very different languages.
Okay, so that's good to know. I'm worried about it. If they start calling me in English, like, will they be able to actually incorporate these people? I am very skeptical about their ability to slot in Koreans unless they go like fully Korean and be successful with it. I don't know. Like they, in their last 2 matches, I think they had the new players in, right? And
yeah,
like for me, the fact that they would do that, like let Fearless and auto play, knowing that it would not go, like that is because if we got new players, the last thing I want to do is put them in a situation where they're almost guaranteed to fail, because the 2 DPS players who regularly play in China for various reasons, and also they've had no practice and don't speak any Chinese at all. Like that's worrisome. It makes me feel like they're maybe not going to be as about creating the proper synergy and sliding these guys in, because again, like that, I think it was really, really dumb idea to let them play right away.
I think to that, actually, I don't disagree with the idea of playing them right away, rather the mindset that they let the players go into that, because if you're going, I mean, they got in there 2 days in before, so clearly they're jet lagged, clearly they don't know what the hell is going on. But the fact that then they take to Twitter afterwards and start sobbing about how they're sorry about the situation tells me that they didn't put them into that situation to just like, hey, go give it a shot and see what happens. They legitimately were trying to win and then put the players in this new environment that clearly is not that. And so it already caused damage to the players right away. Whereas it could have been a beautiful opportunity for them to just have some fun out there here before the team is fully there.
Right. And say like, hey guys, stage 3 is the serious time. We're reinventing it. Whereas now it's like those guys are already like deep into Shanghai losingness of like, that whole.
I would have expected to see them come out and be like, "Oh, we had some fun. It was a fun time. We'll get them next time." But it's only 2 days of practice.
Turns out I don't speak Chinese. Oops. Like, make a meme out of it.
It's possible that some of those Korean players do basic Chinese in school, because obviously with the proximity of those countries and their shared history of being neighbors, some Korean students will study Chinese. So I don't know if these particular Korean players have, but it's not entire. Mostly they study English. It has to be said.
Yeah. So anyway, I would love to see Shanghai do well. I do not think it will. I do not think that these changes will bring that about.
Will they be Dallas in the first?
That's going to be such a good match. I wonder.
No. Come on.
Fire versus fire.
I think like someone's got to be the first team to lose to Shanghai. Like it has to be someone. They're not going to go 0-40. Do we all agree about that?
Probably not at this stage.
I believe in them. I think they can do anything they set their fucking minds to.
Is that not part of your consulting? Your sports psychologist now?
Well, I'd go to the other teams.
Beezy's just sweating right now because closest to almost lose to the Shanghai Dragons. So
that was.
It's just this is the bias. It's like, he thinks London's the best team because they're busy like absolutely wrecking his team, and then he's like, man, Shanghai's actually okay. He's like, we almost lost them. If I say they're garbage, then it looks bad on me.
Yeah, we that was a game where we almost beat ourselves. Like that was a lot of mistakes going into it, a lot of mistakes in the game. We actually made some changes in how we do things after the game, in terms of like so the halftime break. We used to have the guys come back to the dugout and they'd sit around and like they'd chat with the guys who weren't starting, they'd chat with them. And I think it created an environment where people, because the first two matches were so meme-worthy, like Roshan was literally just killing himself constantly. Like everyone was joking and like, oh, it's over, like doesn't matter. And then they go back on stage and they've lost focus. So we learned a lot from that match. We actually executed some team changes, but
then do you think that Shanghai, when they take their first win, will it be based off of their assertiveness taking the win, or somebody else being so bad that they fuck up and end up just giving the win?
That's the reason I brought it up, is because like someone's gonna have first. It's like if you look down the list of teams on the table, like who's the most likely to lose? It's Dallas, right? So if we all agree that they're probably gonna win a game, like if we take that as a given that they will win at least one match, like who else would it be against? Who else is gonna drop that to Shanghai?
Plus, there's also another reason why they probably will as well is, again, teams that try different rosters out and like putting a player in. I'm sure people have done that tons of times already, but sooner or later that can lose you the one game. Even then, when you put your real lineup in, you now have one less game to be able to lose. So in theory, they are primed eventually to win. Like everyone can't just lose forever. What they should do though is, here's the thing. I'll tell you already, Shanghai Dragons, listen to my words here. This is how you capture people's hearts. Have you ever heard, like, there's been a variant of this story, because this story is funny, so people have done a variant of it a million times. But in tennis, right, there was a player who was called Robin Soderling, and he was from Sweden, right? And he lost in the French Open final to Roger Federer in like 2009 or something. And he actually had never beaten Federer. And I think actually it was the next year's French Open, he played Roger Federer in the quarterfinals and beat him. And when he beat him, because he'd lost something like 12 matches in a row to Federer, what he said in his winner's interview was, and let that be a lesson to you, nobody beats Robin Soderling 13 times in a row, which is obviously fucking straight fire banter, isn't it? So what you need to do, Shanghai Dragons, is when you finally win, you make light of it by saying nobody beats Shanghai Dragons 30 times in a row, whatever it is, whatever the exact number is. Figure it out. Get prepared. You've got some time to prepare, but that will be straight fire banter. That's all you have to do, and you'll win every fan's heart in that moment. So just ending on that note, is that it?
No.
Okay.
That's a good one.
I actually have a legit question for you,
right.
the esports historian. Yeah. Can you, in esports history, think of a worse losing streak than what the Shanghai Dragons are on right now?
No, because here's
level of competition.
Yeah, here's the sad thing, okay, which is about how bad it's been for them, is that every other team who was even terrible, Monte, the Renegades team itself lost 1 billion games in a row.
It was 11 or 13. All right,
still, exactly.
13, no
still, no, but my point is, no one's ever done it. Like, no one in LCS, for example, has ever just lost every single. Okay, it looked like it was going to happen this NALCS season. Actually, this team, Golden Guardians, did everything wrong. They got only NA players. They got NA players. Some of them weren't even proven. They clearly didn't pay to get all the top talent, and they got a coaching staff that was questionable. So as a result, they were like, I think, 0 something pretty bad for a while, maybe 0-8 or something, maybe 0-10. But even they eventually actually won a few games. That's the point. The reason why it's almost impossible is because even the psychological component, people start thinking you're a free win, so that it gives you more likelihood to get the win. People start thinking they can experiment against you, which then gives you a better chance. So it's like eventually you always do win a couple of games. So actually there's nothing comparable in esports history that I can think of. Even in Korean leagues, no one ever just literally lost every game as far as I'm aware. Not least because you also need a long format like this to even have a chance to do it. You know, normally you'd kick off the team, or the season would end, you'd be relegated. Basically, Shanghai Dragons really is testing that whole theory that people had about franchising. Like, well, if you just take away the fear of losing, eventually it's got to get good. Like, they're like, well, we'll see if that's true.
As an advocate of franchising, this situation is
it's not good, is it?
Testing my abilities to argue in favor of it.